Welcome, and make yourself comfortable. Let your eyes grow heavy, your breathing slow and steady, as we drift back in time to a world of creaking timber halls, dusty training yards, and the soft rustle of chainmail against padded cloth. Tonight, we're going to explore a slice of medieval life that many know only through faded tales of knights and chivalry, but without the rose-tinted sheen. You see, before a knight ever raised his sword in noble battle, he was first a boy, a squire, shaped by years of repetition, hardship, and quiet. And the path to knighthood was rarely glorious up close. Instead, it was long, mundane, and bruising. So, imagine yourself in that world now. The cold stone floors beneath your feet, the smell of oiled leather, and old straw, the distant echo of horses stamping in their stalls. Listen to the rhythm of life as a medieval squire, and let each detail lull you deeper into sleep. Segment 1, Part 1. A squire's don. Imagine a small stone chamber, tucked high within the keep of a medieval castle. The walls are rough-hewn and cold to the touch, their chill seeping into straw-stuffed pallets lined up like sentries along the floor. On these scratchy beds, a handful of boys lie cold beneath coarse, woolen blankets, their breaths visible in the dim half-light of approaching dawn. You, too, are here tonight, drifting on the edge of sleep as the world of the squire unfolds. Feel the first hint of morning, a faint rustling of rushes on the flagstones, a soft creak as the heavy wooden door swings open. He clears his throat once. No need for words. The boys know what this summons means. A squire's day begins before the sun has climbed above the horizon, before the birds have finished their tentative pride-on songs. There is no time to linger in the warmth of the bedding, though warmth is a generous word for these thin coverings that barely keep out the night air. The boys shift and groan, shoulders stiff from yesterday's drills, legs cramped from hours spent standing at attention. They murmur to one another, voices hushed, mindful not to wake the knight and his household above. One by one, they swing their feet to the floor. The rushes covering the cold stones crunch underfoot, releasing the stale scent of last night's hearth smoke and yesterday's sweat. Tunics are pulled over linen shirts, simple garments, dyed in muted earth tones, their hems fraying with use. Belts are cinched, boots tugged on with stiff fingers, and each boy checks the small dagger at his waist, the mark of his station. Not yet a knight, but no longer a mere page. The corridor outside is barely lit by flickering rushlights, their glow throwing long shadows that dance across the bare walls. Down these halls, the squires trudge, heads bowed against the chill that seeps through every crack and crevice. In the main yard, the castle stirs. You can almost hear it. The soft nicker of horses in the stables, the distant clatter of pots as the kitchen staff rouses fires back to life, the creak of wooden gates being drawn open to let in the morning's first supply cart. But before any of that, there are tasks to do. The same tasks that wait every day, rain or shine. The squire's first duty is to see to the knight's horse, a creature as prized and pampered as any nobleman in this fortress of stone. Before dawn's chill can bite too deep, the boys hurry to the stables, breath misting in the cold air. The stable doors stand open, hinges squeaking, the smell of hay, leather, and damp earth meeting them like a familiar friend. Inside, the squire approaches his knight's mount. For each squire, the horse is more than just an animal. It is a symbol of his future, his hopes for knighthood, his chance at freedom and glory, however far off that may seem in these bleak hours. He murmurs soft words to the beast, running a palm down its strong neck, feeling the warmth of life beneath a glossy coat. In this quiet moment, the bond between boy and beast is forged anew each day. First comes the feeding. A bucket of oats carefully measured out by the stable master the night before is set before the horse. While the animal crunches its breakfast, the squire gathers a wooden brush and begins the laborious task of grooming. Each stroke raises a small cloud of dust, the bristles working through tangles and clumps of dried sweat. Bits of straw cling stubbornly to the horse's mane, and the squire works them free with patient fingers, mindful not to pull too hard lest he spook his charge. Beneath each hoof, packed mud and dung must be scraped away. The iron shoes are checked for cracks, the nails for looseness. It's tedious work, back bent low in the straw, fingers raw from the cold and the roughness of the horse's coat. Sometimes, if the squire is lucky, an older stable hand might help, showing him how to soothe a restless leg with a calm voice and a steady touch. More often, though, the squire is on his own, working quickly to be done before the night wakes. Once the horse's coat gleams, its mane free of knots, its hooves cleaned and checked, The tack must be inspected. Leather straps stiffen overnight in the damp air. Buckles rust if left unwiped. The saddle, often heavy and cracked from years of use, is lifted onto a wooden stand. The squire rubs oil into every inch, his knuckles aching from the effort. If a strap shows wear, he must patch it or find a piece of scrap leather to reinforce the stitching. A frayed strap might mean a thrown rider on the field, an unforgivable failure. In the corner of the stable, a large water trough reflects the dawn light as it trickles in through the open doors. The squire checks that the water is fresh, skimming away flecks of straw and chaff that float on the surface. He watches the horse drink, counting heartbeats, letting the steady rhythm calm his mind. There is something grounding in this routine, something that dulls the sting of early mornings and harsh orders. The horse must be cared for, no matter the weather, no matter the boy's fatigue. Beyond the horse, there are other animals to see too. The squire may help check the night's hunting dogs, lean, watchful creatures that shift and circle in their kennels. He tops off their water bowls, tosses them scraps from the kitchen, and murmurs the same soft reassurances he gave the horse. The dogs look up at him with eyes that gleam in the half-light, silent witnesses to his daily struggles. Segment 2. Part 1. Sword. Practice. Blisters. Bruises. And the relentless rhythm of the yard step now into the broad, open training yard. The ground beneath your feet is not the smooth grass of a lordess garden nor the polished stone of a castle hall. It is a churned, packed square of earth, littered with bits of straw and the footprints of countless boys who have come before. Some parts are muddy, pocked with last night's rain. Other spots are dry and hard as baked clay. In this patch of dirt, more than one squire has lost a tooth, gained a scar, or learned the hard lesson that pain is a faithful tutor. The air here is sharper, filled with the faint temps of sweat and the dry rasp of wood scraping wood. Above you, the sky is pale and high, the sun's rays creeping across the yard in slow, watchful arcs. A line of squires stand at attention, practiced swords at their sides, lengths of sturdy oak or ash, heavier than they appear, weighted just enough to mimic the real steel they hope one day to wield in earnest. A single voice cuts through the low hum of shifting feet and quiet coughs. His figure stands at the far end of the yard, arms folded across his chest, a short, knotted stick resting against one shoulder. His eyes sweep over the boys with an expression that offers no warmth. He has seen 1,000 of them. Eager faces, trembling knees, bruises hidden beneath tunics. To him, they are lumps of raw clay to be molded into men who can swing a blade without flinching, who can stand steady when the battle horn blows. Form up, he barks. The words ring out across the dirt square, bouncing off the stone walls that hemmed the yard in. Boots shuffle, shoulders straighten, wooden swords lift and tilt in awkward, uncertain unison. The squire stands among them, shifting his grip on the hilt, feeling the smooth, worn wood beneath his palms. It is lighter than steel, yet its swing still bites into arms, grown weary from repetition. Stance, the master growls. A few boys adjust, widening their feet, bending their knees. The squire does the same, trying to remember the proper distance. Too narrow, and you topple like a sapling in the wind. Too wide and you'll stumble over your own feet. A soft wind ruffles the straw scattered across the yard, carrying the faint clatter of blacksmiths' hammers from the nearby forge. But here, the only music that matters is the dull thud of practice sword striking padded posts, or worse, striking flesh when a boy's guard slips. The first drill is simple. So simple, it fools the unwary into thinking it is easy. A downward stroke, over and over, the blade raised above the shoulder, arms locked just so, elbows bent, but not too much, wrists firm, but not stiff. The squire lifts his practice sword, feels the weight settle into his shoulders, then brings it down in a swift arc toward the strawed dummy before him. The impact sends a tremor through his hands, up into his forearms, rattling the half-healed bruises from yesterday's lesson. Again and again, the master walks the line, stick tapping out a rhythm on his boot, the thump-thump-thump as constant as a heartbeat. He stops beside the squire, watches him swing. The boy knows not to glance sideways, not to check for approval. Eyes forward, blade up, strike true. Once the stables are in order, the squire wipes his hands on a coursed cloth, smearing away dirt and horsehair. His tunic is flecked with dust, but there is no time to change. There is never enough time. He trudges back across the yard, boots sinking into the churned mud, the air sharp with the tamps of manure and the distant promise of bread baking in the kitchen ovens. The sun, now peeking above the outer wall, spills pale gold across the courtyard. A few servants appear, carrying baskets of laundry to the well, their chatter quiet but persistent. A blacksmith's hammer rings out, striking metal in a steady, patient rhythm. All around him, the castle comes alive. Yet for the squire, the day has only just begun. Imagine standing there, the weight of a wooden bucket in your hands, the bite of cold air on your cheeks, the smell of horse and leather still clinging to your sleeves. The tasks ahead loom large. The knight's armor must be checked, weapons polished, messages carried, orders obeyed without question. There is no room for error, no moment of rebellion. Yet beneath this unending cycle a seed of hope persists, that someday these dawns of endless work will give way to glory on the field, honor in the hall, and the right to stand as an equal among the armored men he serves. For now, the squire squares his shoulders. He has done what he must in the stables, and the day calls him onward. Ahead lies the armory, the clang of iron on iron, the hiss of the sharpening stone, and 100 other tasks before the sun sets once more. As you drift, imagine the rhythm of these early hours, the scrape of the hoof-pick, the soft whinny of a horse, the rustle of straw beneath quick feet. The dawn of a medieval squire is no grand adventure, no tale of dragon-slaying and gallant quests. It is a story of routine, of cold hands and warm flanks, of whispered promises that one day all this toil will be worth it. And in that simple, repetitive life, there is a quiet sort of bravery, the kind that grows in the dark, long before the first light of day. Picture yourself lingering in the stables a little longer, the pale dawn now creeping further into the dusty corners. For the squire, the bond with his knight's horse is as important as any lesson learned with sword or shield. It is here, in these stalls, that smell of sweet hay and damp earth, that trust is built, quietly, patiently, one morning at a time. The horse shifts its weight, hooves clinking softly on the rough stone floor. The squire stands back for a moment, brush in hand, watching the creature's breath puff in little clouds. There's a certain peace here, far from the echoing clang of the training yard or the clipped commands of the master. A boy learns early that a knight's horse is not just a beast of burden, but an extension of the knight himself, a living companion that must be ready for ceremony, travel, or battle at a moment's notice. The grooming ritual begins in earnest. The brush sweeps in long, patient strokes along the horse's withers, each bristle lifting away the grit and dust of the night. Small knots in the mane are teased out with care, fingers working steadily to free each tangle without pulling too hard. A skittish horse can toss its head, catch a boy unawares, and more than one squire bears a faint scar above an eyebrow or cheekbone from such a careless moment. With each stroke, the squire murmurs low, soothing nonsense, words that matter less than the tone, a habit picked up from older stable hands who know that horses trust calm voices and steady hands. The rhythm of the brush, the warmth of the animal, and the soft shuffle of straw beneath boots combine into a morning symphony that would be unremarkable to anyone else. But to the squire, it's as vital as breath. Sometimes, the squire must deal with a horse that is less than cooperative, a warhorse bred for strength and endurance, muscles rippling beneath a sleek coat, yet temperamental and easily startled by the smallest sound. A clatter of pails, the slam of a stable door, the sharp bark of a hunting dog nearby. Any of these might set the beast stamping or tossing its head. The squire learns to be light on his feet, to step aside quickly yet never appear afraid. Animals sense fear, and a squire cannot afford to show weakness, not even to a horse. Once the brushing is done, hooves are lifted one by one. Each hoof is a small world of its own. Packed mud, tiny stones lodged between frog and sole, bits of straw clinging stubbornly to the edges. The squire wedges a hoof-pick against the stubborn dirt, scraping it out with slow, careful strokes. Too rough, and the horse may flinch or pull away. Too timid, and the job is done poorly, risking a cracked hoof or bruised foot when the horse is next ridden out. There are moments when the horse snorts, steam curling from its nostrils, shifting its weight impatiently. The squire pauses, rests his hand against the warm flank, feels the steady rise and fall of the creature's breath. There is no rush, or rather, there is always a rush. Chores stack up like stones in a wall. But with a horse, patience must override hurry. A small cut, an unnoticed stone, a loose shoe, each can spell disaster on a field. Once all four hooves are clean, the squire checks the iron shoes for wear. He runs a thumb along each nail, gently taps the metal, listening for that clear, sharp ring that tells him the shoe is secure. A dull sound, a wobbly nail, and the farrier will need to be called before the day's ride. Better to catch it now, in this quiet hour, than to see a horse stumble on uneven ground later, throwing both steed and knight into the mud. After the grooming, tack must be examined. The leather bridle hangs on a wooden peg, its bit polished to a muted gleam. The squire lifts it, fingers tracing each strap, searching for weak spots where the hide has cracked or stretched. He checks the stitching, rough but strong, and pulls the leather through his hands, feeling for any give that might widen under strain. In the corner, the saddle awaits. It is heavy, made of thick leather stretched over a sturdy wooden tree. A young squire might struggle to lift it alone, grunting as he swings it over a sawhorse for inspection. The saddle blanket beneath it, often a thick wool pad, must be shaken out, freed of burrs and stray straw. Even the smallest thorn can press through, causing the horse to buck and twist under the rider's weight. A jar of animal fat sits on a low shelf, kept warm near the stable's small brazier. The squire dips a rag into the fat, working it into the leather straps, massaging it in circles until the oil. Different. Not the sweet, living scent of hay and horses, but the colder temps of metal, oil, and the faint acidic bite of vinegar used to ward off the relentless creep of rust. Imagine the flickering light of a few tallow candles casting a wavering glow over rows of helms, shields, and the glinting, interlocking rings of chainmail. Against the far wall, a great oaken table stretches the length of the chamber. Its surface is scarred by countless scrapes and gouges from years of sword edges, spear points, and the weight of steel breastplates laid out for mending or inspection. The squire stands here now, breath visible in the chill that clings to these stone walls. His hands are already roughened from the morning's stable work, but he rubs them together briskly, before lifting the knight's armor piece by piece. Each section is surprisingly heavy in the hand. Cold, solid, unforgiving. A reminder that these plates, these rings, are meant not for show, but to protect a man's life when blades clash and arrows fly. First comes the chainmail hauberk, a shirt of thousands upon thousands of tiny iron rings, each joined by hand, each a link in the fragile promise of protection. The squire lifts it onto the table with a soft grunt, its weight pulling at his shoulders. He spreads it out, fingers tracing the rows, eyes scanning for broken or bent links. One flaw, hidden deep in the weave, could turn a knight's defense into a fatal weakness. The work is monotonous, and that is its danger. It invites the mind to drift, but a good squire learns early that drift means mistakes, and mistakes in this world can cost lives. So the squire focuses on the pattern of the rings, testing each suspect spot by feel and sight. A small iron awl lies at hand for prying out damaged links, a coil of fresh rings for replacing what must be mended. He works methodically, section by section, until he is sure that the hauberk is whole. Next, he wipes the chainmail down with a rag dampened in vinegar. The temp stings his nose as he rubs it into every crevice. Then comes a thin smear of oil, worked in with cloth until the rings gleam dully in the shifting candlelight. He drapes the hauberk carefully over a wooden frame to air, the metal hissing faintly as it settles into place. Beside it lies the knight's breastplate, a curved expanse of hammered steel, sturdy yet scarred by old impacts. No piece of armor lasts forever without signs of its service. The squire sits on a low stool, the breastplate balanced across his knees. A bit of fine sand mixed with oil works as a rudimentary polish. He rubs in slow, patient circles, each pass of the rag smoothing away the thin coat of corrosion that creeps in overnight, especially in damp weather. He pauses now and then, holding the breastplate up to catch the light, checking for dings that might need a smith's hammer, for hairline cracks that must be watched. Some squires learn to patch minor flaws themselves, heating and peening small dents back into place, though that work is usually left to the castle's blacksmith. For now, the squire's job is to keep the armor ready, gleaming enough to show respect for the knight's station, but not so polished that it glitters like a noble's ceremonial plate. This is armor meant to be used, not paraded. Beside him, the greaves wait, curved plates for the lower legs, with padded straps that must be checked for fraying. The squire rubs oil into the leather fastenings, flexes each buckle to be sure they haven't stiffened overnight. He tests the hinges with careful fingers, mindful of a pin that might have worked loose or rusted in place. A knight who finds himself unable to bend a knee because of a stuck hinge is a knight brought low before a blade ever touches him. The helmet sits on a padded stand, a visored bassinet with a rounded crown and a perforated faceplate. Its interior is lined with a stitched leather cap that can be removed and aired out, though few squires relish the task. Sweat and hair oil seep in during battle or even training, and the lining must be brushed, beaten gently to knock out dust, then left near the hearth to dry fully. A damp liner breeds mold, and no knight will thank a squire for that. When the helmet's shell is polished, the squire tests the visors. He lifts it slowly, listening for the click of the catch, the smooth swing up and down. A visor that jams mid-battle could mean blindness at the worst possible moment. Satisfied, he lowers it back into place with a soft clink, the sound echoing in the empty armory. At his elbow, a shallow wooden bowl holds the tools of his trade. Scraps of linen cloth, a small pot of tallow, a whetstone for blades that must be touched up. Though the sword itself is often the knight's own domain, a trusted squire is sometimes allowed to hone its edge. For now, though, the boy's work is focused on the armor that encases his knight like a second skin. As he works, the squire thinks of all the stories told in the barracks. Older boys whispering in the flickering shadows about knights who fell because a strap broke, or mail tore open, or a helm's buckle failed. Some of these tales are surely exaggerations, yet each one drives home the same lesson. The smallest neglect can have the greatest cost. He works in silence, save for the soft rasp of cloth over steel, the occasional clink of chain links settling into place. Once in a while, the armorer might pass through, casting a quick eye over the boy's work, perhaps nodding approval or pointing out a spot he missed. Praise is rare, criticism more common, not out of cruelty, but because perfection is not optional when a man's life depends on iron and leather. Hours slip by unnoticed in the dim chamber. Outside, the voices in the courtyard grow louder, pages running errands, servants drawing water, the clatter of a training yard beginning its daily rhythm of barked orders, and the dull thud of practice blades. But here, in the cool hush of the armory, the squire remains in his private world, where patience is a virtue and thoroughness, a shield against future blame. When the armor is cleaned, oiled, and laid out just so, each piece resting in its proper place on a wooden rack or hook, the squire steps back to survey his work. The chainmail drapes in neat folds, its iron rings catching the light like a woven river of dusk. The breastplate gleams dully, free of spots or smudges, the greaves, gauntlets, and helm weight in quiet readiness, as they will day after day until they're called upon to earn new dents and scratches. Sinks deep and the cracks soften. The smell is sharp but familiar, a mix of tallow, old sweat, and the faint bite of vinegar used to keep mold at bay. It clings to the boy's hands, marks him as one of the castle's lesser seen, but ever needed. He sets aside the oiled tack, then tests the girth strap. He loops it around his own forearm, pulls, and watches the hole stretch slightly, the buckle straining. Satisfied, he threads it through the saddle once more, making sure it lies flat and true. Sometimes, if the knight has ridden hard the day before, the squire must tend to the horse's back. He checks for rub marks, patches of raw skin where the saddle has chafed. A salve, thick and cold, is dabbed onto the tender spots, soothing the beast even as it shivers beneath his touch. He whispers more soft nonsense, reassuring the horse that tomorrow will be gentler. Of course, he cannot promise such things. War horses and hunting steeds alike are pushed to their limits when duty calls. Outside the stable doors, the light grows stronger. Frost glitters on the cobblestones. A few other squires appear now, exchanging quiet nods. Each boy is bound by the same unwritten code. Do your tasks well, ask no needless questions, and show no sign of complaint that might reach the knight's ears. For a squire who shows weakness, there are always others ready to take his place, eager for the slim chance to rise one rung higher on the ladder of fortune. Before he leaves the stable, the squire runs his hand down the horse's neck one last time. He feels the warmth beneath the coarse hair, the pulse that thrums steady and strong. In that heartbeat, there is a silent promise. If he cares for this creature well, it will carry his knight safely across the muddy fields, through the din of tournaments, and perhaps one day, though that day feels impossibly far, beneath the squire himself when he earns his own spurs. He gathers his tools, places them back on their hooks, wipes his hands on a scrap of linen already stiff with old oil. The stable smells linger on him now. Straw, sweat, the faint sweetness of oats. These scents will cling to him throughout the day, marking him as someone who serves, who toils before others wake. whose dreams of glory are forged not with heroic deeds, but with the patient work of caring for another's steed. As he steps into the courtyard, the castle is fully awake. The kitchen fires roar, the clang of iron rings from the forge, the chatter of maids carrying baskets echoes off the stone walls. But beneath the noise, the squire carries with him a small, quiet pride, the knowledge that in this dawn ritual, he has done his first duty well. His knight will ride today on a mount well fed, well groomed, ready for whatever comes. And so he squares his shoulders, lifts his eyes to the path ahead, and moves on to the next task. The heavy doors of the armory, beckoning with their promise of iron and steel that must gleam before the sun reaches its peak, step now from the warmth of the stables into the cool shadow of the armory. The heavy door creaks open on iron hinges that need oil just as badly as the armor inside. The smell here is quiet scrape of spoons against wooden bowls, the occasional muffled cough, the slow drip of water from a cracked jug. Beside him, another squire tears at a heel of bread. The crust is hard, nearly unyielding, but dipped in the pottage it softens just enough to chew. The boy's hands are raw, knuckles chapped from hours spent at the forge or the tack bench. The squire looks at his own, a nick on the thumb from an oar, a smear of oil beneath a fingernail, small badges of the work that define them all. From time to time a cook passes by and ruffles a boy's hair, an absent gesture more habit than affection. To the kitchen staff, the squires are just one more set of hungry mouths, one more group to be kept moving, fed just enough to keep them standing through drills that will bruise their arms and test their patience. In the far hearth a larger pot bubbles, the lord's pottage, thicker, richer, laden with more than bone and barley. It will never pass a squire's lips, save perhaps when the knight leaves scraps on his trencher, and a favored boy is summoned to clear the plate and sneak a mouthful before the dogs do. But that is for later, if it comes at all. As he eats, the squire's eyes drift to the rush-covered floor. Flecks of ash swirl near his boots, caught in a draught that sighs through the half-open kitchen door. Outside, the clatter of buckets and the distant clang of steel against wood grows louder. The training yard calls, and this meal must be eaten with one eye on the door, ready to move before the master-at-arms appears in search of tardy boys. When the last mouthful of pottage is gone, he wipes the bowl with a bread heel, chewing the last bite until his jaw aches. There is no sweetness to follow, no honeyed treat to balance the salt and fat that coat his tongue. Only a mouthful of thin ale from a battered cup, barely enough to wash down the taste. The ale is weak by design. No boy can train well with a fogged mind. Yet its bitter tang is strangely comforting. A familiar end to this humble feast. Bowl emptied, he wipes his mouth on his sleeve, folds his arms behind his back, and waits for the steward's nod. Around him, other squires do the same. A silent line of half-grown boys, shoulders hunched, boots muddy from the stable and yard, eyes flicking toward the light that leaks through the kitchen's narrow slit windows. The day, they know, is about to turn. Before the yard, there is always a handful of small tasks left to complete. The kitchen steward barks a name. The squire steps forward, takes up a bundle of kindling to be dropped off at the outer smithy. Another boy shoulders a leather water skip, bound for the training ground, troughs to ensure the dogs and horses have fresh water when the drills begin. A third lad, smaller than the rest, is handed a message, sealed in wax. He'll run it to the knight's chamber, boots slipping on the damp stone stairs as he goes. These errands weave through every hour of a squire's life. No task is too small, too trivial. A knight might demand his shield be brought to the yard precisely when he lifts his helm. A lord's guest might require a borrowed dagger or a basin of warm water for washing dusty hands. Each small request is another brick in the unseen wall that supports the castle's daily life. And behind that wall stand the squires, boys trained to be invisible until called upon, quick on their feet yet silent in their duty. The squire shifts, the bundle of kindling on his shoulder. The sticks poke through the rough cloth, leaving small splinters that catch on his sleeve. Outside, the crisp air bites at his cheeks again, the warmth of the kitchen gone the moment he crosses the threshold. In the courtyard, the castle hums with life now. The stable hands shout to each other as they lead horses out for exercise. The cook's boy drags a basket of scraps toward the kennels, the dogs yapping and pacing behind their wooden gates. Over it all, the faint, steady rhythm of wooden practice swords striking padded posts floats on the breeze, a sound that will soon fill the squire's ears and arms with the dull ache of repetition. He drops the kindling at the smithy door, nods to the apprentice who lifts it away without a word. He rubs the splinters from his sleeve, fingers There's no time to dwell on the sting. Another boy passes him on the path, this one carrying the knight's banner to be checked for tears before the next ceremonial ride. They exchange a glance. Not quite a greeting, but a moment of shared understanding that says, "Here we are, another dawn, another day." With these small errands done, the squire makes his way toward the yard's entrance. He feels the mud cling to his boots. Hears the mastered arms already barking orders that crack across the square like cold whips. His belly, though filled only with the humblest of meals, feels warm enough for now. Enough fuel to carry him through hours of drills, bruises, and the relentless expectation that he must be ready to serve without hesitation. He pauses at the gate, just for a heartbeat, looks back at the castle's sprawl. The kitchen's chimney belching smoke, the stable doors yawning wide, the armory's heavy shutters half open to the sun. Each corner of this fortress has claimed a piece of his morning. The horse, the armor, the meal, the errands, all woven together into the tapestry of a life that is half servant, half apprentice, and wholly unseen by those who benefit most. But he knows, as every squire learns in time, that the small things matter. The brush stroke on a horse's coat, the oiled hinge of a visor, the bowl of pottage eaten in silence. Each is a step on a path that, if walked faithfully, may one day lead to the moment when he lifts a sword not in practice, but in defense of his own name and honor. For now, though, there is no time for such dreams. The day's real work begins with the first shouted command. The squire grips the training sword he left leaning by the gate, wood worn smooth from 1,000 blows. He takes his place among the other boys, feet shifting in the churned earth, heart steadying itself for the hours ahead. And so, the dawn slips away into the noise and sweat of the training yard. Another day in a life shaped by repetition, the quiet, patient forging of something stronger than iron. The making of a squire, one small task at a time. A final wipe of his hands, a quick check to be sure the tools are cleaned and put away. The squire lifts the discarded scraps of linen, drops them into the hearth to burn, the acrid scent of singed oil rising in a thin curl of smoke. He feels the stiffness in his back now, the ache in his wrists from the steady rub of metal and cloth. These small pains are as much a part of a squire as dawn as the stable their straw or the taste of cold bread before practice. Outside, the sun now stands clear above the castle walls. The time for quiet chores is done. Ahead lies the training yard, the bark of the mastodons, the bruising repetition that shapes a boy's body for war. But before the squire leaves this place, he allows himself a small moment. Running one hand along the curve of the breastplate, the hard lines of the helm, the interlocked maze of the chainmail. This, he thinks, is his contribution, invisible, perhaps, but vital. He is the silent keeper of his knight's second skin. And so, the boy squares his shoulders, slips out into the cold sunlight, and turns toward the next part of his day. Iron and oil cling to his fingertips, a quiet promise that his work, though unseen by the feast tables and noble courts, matters more than any flourish of silken banners or grand speeches. Here, in the simple ritual of polish and care, the squire's dawn finds its rhythm, the same, day after day, until the dawn comes when he will don such armor himself. Step now from the cold hush of the armory into the low, smoky warmth of the castle's kitchen. The squire's hands, still smelling faintly of vinegar and iron oil, push open a heavy door that swings inward on squeaking iron hinges. A wave of warmth greets him, the first true heat he has felt since dawn. The kitchen is no grand hall of feasting and merriment. Here, under the low beams darkened by decades of smoke, life is all clatter and hush at once. Iron pots hang over crackling hearths. Long-handled spoons and battered ladles rattle in rough hands. A few sleepy scullery maids trudge back and forth, their aprons already smudged with flour and soot. The squire steps aside to let one pass her arms burdened with a basket of hard, round loaves, the bread that will feed not the lord or his honored guests, but the dozens of mouths that toil below the salt. The stable hands, the porters, the smiths' apprentices, and of course the squires. He makes his way to the side table, a rough plank set on barrels near the back wall. It's away from the cook's busiest lane. Out of the way, but close enough to feel the hearth's warmth seep through his sleeves. A handful of other squires are already gathered here, heads bowed over their small portions, chewing methodically, eyes half-lidded from the hour's early toil. A wooden bowl is pressed into the squire's hands by the steward's boy. Inside, a scoop of yesterday's pottage barley, a few wilted greens, and the ghost of a bone that once flavored it. It is thin, lukewarm, yet its steam brings a comfort that belies its meager nature. He takes a bite, the broth salty on his tongue, soft grains slipping between his teeth. No one talks much here. Words are precious, best saved for later, when the day's labor demands a complaint or two whispered behind the master's back. Now, there is only too wide, the master snaps. The squire adjusts his feet, shifts his weight, lifts the sword once more. Down it comes, thud against straw, the bundle shivering with each blow. The first few swings feel strong, the next dozen steady, but soon the weight of the wood grows leaden in his arms. Muscles protest, sweat beads at his hairline. A drop slides down his nose, stings his eyes. He blinks it away without pausing the rhythm. In the next row, a boy drops his guard, lets the tip of his sword dip. The master's stick flashes out. A sharp rap on the shoulder, enough to make the boy flinch and hiss. The master shouts. Again. The stick is not cruel. It is a reminder. In battle, a lowered guard is not met with a rap but with steel. Men slide by, unnoticed, yet unyielding. Arms burn, shoulders ache, fingers blistered beneath the rough grip of the practice sword's hilt. There is no glamour here, no flowing cloaks or noble cheers, just sweat, repetition, and the steady accumulation of pain that promises, someday, to become skill. When the master finally calls a halt, the squires lower their weapons, chests heaving, eyes fixed on the ground. Some shift from foot to foot, trying to ease the cramps that creep up from standing too long in one pose. The squire rolls his shoulders, feels the dull throb where the muscles have begun to knot. He wants to drop the sword, to let it fall and flex his stiff fingers, but he knows better. The master's stick watches all. Pairs. The master calls. A few boys glance sideways, gauging who they'll be matched with. There is a silent hierarchy here. Older boys, paired with smaller ones. The cocky ones hoping to test their skill against the best. The squire finds himself facing a boy just his age. Freckled cheeks, flushed red, hair damp and plastered to his forehead. They nod once. No words needed. They know what comes next. They face each other, swords held at the ready. The master gives no long speech, no dramatic flourish. He simply says, "Engage," and the yard fills with the clack and thud of wood striking wood. The squire steps forward, brings his blade down in a practiced art. His opponent meets it, the shock jarring up their arms. They circle each other, boots scuffing the dirt, eyes darting from shoulder to hip, looking for the telltale shift that signals an attack. Another swing, a quick jab, deflected. It is a dance, clumsy at first, punctuated by heavy blows that sometimes slip past a guard and land with a hollow thud on ribs or thigh. Each win's a reminder. The master Harms calls out corrections from the sidelines, his voice an ever-present shadow. Tighter grip, lower your elbow, watch your left side. Sometimes, the boys lose balance. A foot catches on a patch of mud, and down one goes, landing hard on his back, in the dirt. There is no laughter, only a hand offered to help him up, a nod that says, "Again." They swing once more, testing and retesting the limits of their small strength. As they move, the squire feels the edge of fatigue sharpening his senses in strange ways. He notices the rhythm of his opponent's breath, the way the other boy's shoulder twitches a heartbeat before he strikes. He learns to feint, a subtle shift that draws a guard wide, creating the smallest opening for a tap to the ribs. A real sword would open flesh. Here, the wood leaves only a bruise, a lesson that lasts just long enough to remember. By the time the master claps his hands and calls a stop, the squire's tunic clings to his back, damp with sweat and dust. His arms hang heavy at his sides, the practice sword feeling twice its weight now. Around him, the other boys stand in small clusters, rubbing shoulders, inspecting fresh bruises with grim pride. A few mutter quiet words to each other, advice, complaints, a half-hearted jest about who hit the hardest. The master's voice cuts through again. Next drill. And, just like that, the respite is gone. New pairs, new practice. Over and over, until the sun stands high above the yard, and every boy feels the deep ache that will wake him in the night, remind him that tomorrow, it all begins again. There is no victory here, no trophies to claim, or banners to wave. Only the steady, unglamorous truth of training. That skill is carved into muscle and bone, through repetition, discomfort, and the relentless hum of days that all feel the same. And so the squire lifts his sword once more, feet shifting on the packed earth, eyes fixed on the next swing. The bruises will bloom purple and yellow by dusk. The blisters will split and scab, but each mark is a quiet promise that one day when steel replaces wood and the stakes are no longer practice, but life and death, he will stand steady, he will remember. The clash of practice swords fades as the squires break ranks and move toward the far end of the yard, where a row of straw butts stand waiting against a low wooden palisade. The earth here is dry, scattered with broken shafts and stray feathers. The archery range is quieter than the clash of the training ring, but in its hush lies its own challenge, an unbroken stillness that leaves no place to hide a trembling arm or wavering focus. The squire joins the line, boots sinking slightly in the churned dirt. He flexes his fingers, stiff from gripping the practice sword for hours, then rubs his palms against his tunic to wipe away sweat and dust. A steward passes along the row, handing each boy a short bow, simple but well made, the wood polished smooth by many hands before him. Its string hums faintly when plucked, a taut reminder that this tool is as much an instrument of patience as of war. Beside him, a quiver leans in the dirt, a handful of arrows, fletched with goose feathers. The points dulled for practice, but still sharp enough to bite into straw and stick. The squire lifts one, tests its weight between thumb and forefinger. The shaft feels straight enough, the feathers a little ragged but true. He lets his fingers brush over the nock, then slides the arrow back among its companions. A barked order from the muster arms. Form up, and the line of squires stands ready, 10 paces from the targets to start, though the distance will lengthen as the day drags on. There is a hush in these first moments. No thud of wood on straw dummies, no bark of swords striking shields, just the faint creak of boughs being bent, the small collective breath of boys learning to master the gentle tension of wood and string. The squire plants his feet shoulder-width apart, left foot forward, right foot back, knees unlocked. He lifts the bow, feeling the pull in his shoulders as he draws the string back to his cheek. The first draw is always the hardest. The muscles stiff from the sword drills now tested in a different way. His elbow wavers slightly, the bowstring quivers with the strain, and his eyes narrow as he tries to find the invisible line from fingertip to target. He releases, the arrow leaps forward with a soft, satisfying hum, a brief, crisp sound that vanishes as quickly as it came. The shaft buries itself in the straw, but with a muted thunk, a finger S width left of the painted mark that stands in for an enemy SI or HA. A good shot for the first of the day. He allows himself the smallest of nods before reaching for the next arrow. Around him, the same rhythm repeats. Draw, aim, release. The soft hiss of arrows in flight. The low grunts of boys struggling to keep their arms steady as the quivers empty and fill again. Occasionally, a shaft strikes the wooden frame instead of the straw, sending up a splintering crack that makes every boy wince. A reminder that arrows cost coin, and broken arrows can cost a squire a sharp word or worse. The master-at-arms paces behind them, hands clasped behind his back. He does not shout as he does during sword drills. Instead, his voice is lower here, a steady murmur of corrections and reminders. Raise your elbow, lad. Draw to the ear, not the chest. Hold your breath at the top of the pull. The advice is always the same, yet never quite enough to make the next shot perfect. Between volleys, the squires retrieve their arrows. They trudge forward in single file, careful not to step in front of a boy who has not yet fired, a mistake that could turn an idle lesson into sudden tragedy. The straw butts are pocked with holes, some deeper than others, some so clustered that the straw leaks out in tufts like hair pulled from an old broom. The squire pulls his arrows free one by one, inspecting each shaft for splinters, the fletching for tears. A bent arrow flies crooked, wasting effort. A frayed feather makes the shaft waggle in the air, veering off course before it even reaches halfway. He straightens what he can with careful fingers, rubbing a bit of tallow into the fletching if it looks dry. The sun climbs higher now, burning away the last wisps of dawn fog. Sweat gathers under the squire's collar. The bowstring leaves faint welts on his fingertips, red lines that sting when he flexes his hand. Yet there is a strange calm in this work, too. Unlike sword drills, where every move is seen, judged, and corrected with a barked command, archery feels like a private conversation. Just the boy, the bow, and the distant hush of the target waiting to be struck. Sometimes, when the line pauses for water or a quick word of correction, the squire stands alone, bow in hand, feeling its quiet weight. 10 paces become 15, then 20. With each step backward, the lesson grows harder. Small mistakes are magnified, Tiny tremors in the bow hand become wild misses on the straw. Boys mutter to themselves when their arrows thud into the dirt, bending the shafts, caking the fletching in mud that must be wiped away with spit and patience. Sometimes the master pairs them off, not to shoot at each other, but to stand behind and watch, a second pair of eyes to spot mistakes. The squire feels the weight of another boy's gaze on his shoulder, the soft murmur of advice that feels both helpful and humiliating. Draw higher, hold your breath. Let the arrow go with your back, not just your arm. They swap places, trading the BO for the vantage point. Observing mistakes teaches as much as making them. Hours pass unnoticed except by the steady ache that creeps into the shoulders, the burn in the forearm, the numbness in fingers pressed too long against the nock of an arrow. The air grows thick with the smell of trampled grass and churned earth, sweat drying and returning as the sun climbs toward its zenith. A short break comes, just long enough to drink from a shared clay jug, the water lukewarm but welcome. The boys lean on their bows, heads down, shoulders slumped. They glance at their quivers, counting the remaining arrows, knowing each one must be loosed and retrieved again before the drill is done. There is no waste here, not of arrows, not of effort, not of time. When the final volleys come, the squire tries to steady his breath, his arms trembling with fatigue. He feels each pull in the tight knot of his back, each release echoing through his fingers like the ghost of a heartbeat. The arrows fly, some straight, some waver just before they strike, the feathered tails quivering in the air. At last, the master calls an end. The boys gather their arrows one final time, inspecting shafts, smoothing down ruffled fletching, carrying back what remains unbroken. Quivers are stacked neatly by the butts. Bows are returned to the steward's rack, each string gently loosened to keep the wood from warping in the heat. The squire wipes his palms on his tunic, leaving faint streaks of mud and sweat. He flexes his fingers, feeling the raw spots where the string bit deepest. There will be blisters tonight, and tomorrow, too. But he knows they will harden in time, just as his hands will grow steadier, his eyes sharper. As they file away from the range, the yard's noise changes again. The clang of sword practice returns for some. For others, a shift to the horse ring, or the heavy pull of shields raised against blunted spears. But for this brief hour, the squire carries with him the quiet memory of the bow's hum, the soft sigh of arrows in flight, a calm lesson that skill grows not in the clash of swords alone, but in the patient hush between the loosing and the strike. Imagine now the yard's dust settling as the squires make their way to the far paddock, an open ring of churned earth, bordered by a rough wooden fence. Beyond it, the stable's warm breath drifts in the breeze, the scent of hay, sweat, and the sharp tang of oiled tack that clings to the air like an invisible banner of their daily toil. Here, the master-at-arms becomes not just a teacher of blade and bow, but a watchful warden over an unruly dance between boy and beast. For the squire, this part of the day brings a different kind of strain. His arms, already stiff from the repetition of sword drills and the slow burn of the bow, now must steady reins and balance the shifting weight of a living creature beneath him. It is no small thing to learn, to trust a horse not just to bear your weight but to answer your smallest command with hoof and muscle, to become an extension of your own will. When the clash of lances or the charge of a hunt demands it, at the fence, each squire waits his turn, glancing toward the paddock where the older boys guide their mounts in wide, circling canters. Dust rises in pale clouds around the horses' legs, drifting lazily on the breeze before settling again like fine ash. The squire watches the rippling flanks, the flick of tails, the subtle communication between rider and steed. A touch of the knee here, a slight tug of the rein there. His name is called. He steps forward, feeling the weight of the saddle he just spent part of his dawn tending. A stable hand brings his knight's horse, not the prized destrier that would carry his lord into battle, but a sturdy, palfrey-spirited enough to teach respect without being reckless enough to throw a boy into the fence. The squire lays a hand on its neck, murmurs the soft nonsense that horses understand, feeling the warmth beneath the coarse hair. Mounting is the first test. A misstep here, a foot that slips from the stirrup, a leg that catches the cantle, and draws not just the master's sharp tongue but the muffled snickers of the other boys. The squire places his left foot in the stirrup, grips the saddle horn, and swings his right leg over. The leather creaks beneath him, the horse shifts its weight, and for a moment, balance feels like a trick learned only to be forgotten at the worst time. Settled now, he gathers the reins loosely, feeling the pull against his gloves. The mastratum stands at the fence, arms crossed, his sharp eyes tracking every twitch of the boy's heels, every nervous shift of the horse's ears. Walk him out, comes the command, a simple order that conceals a dozen small lessons. He nudges the horse forward with his knees, careful not to dig in too sharply. The animal responds, hooves thudding against the soft dirt in a rhythm that matches the boy's heartbeat. Left hand firm, right hand gentle, a balance learned by instinct more than instruction. Too rough, and the horse tosses its head. Too timid, and the animal grows stubborn, testing whether this small figure perched on its back can truly lead. They circled a paddock at a walk, then a slow trot. The squire bounces in the saddle at first, the motion jarring his spine with each step. The master calls out corrections. Loosen your hips, roll with him, don't fight him. The boy breathes in time with the animal beneath him, feels the slight sway that tells him he is moving as one, not as an unwelcome burden. Another tap of the heel, a soft click of the tongue, and the horse picks up speed. A canter now, the 3-beat gait that makes the paddock feel both too small and suddenly too fast. Dust flies up around them. The wind tugs at the squire's hair, cool against the sweat that beads at his temple. He tries to keep his back straight, his hands light but firm. The saddle creaks, leather straps groan, and the horse snorts, its breath visible in small puffs. When they slow again, riding drills shift. Some boys practice tight turns, urging their horses through small circles, feeling the power coiled beneath them shift from one side to the other. Others are handed lances, blunted sticks, that force them to hold balance with one hand while the other lowers and lifts the weapon in a sweeping arc. The squire watches these older boys with envy, knowing it will be seasons yet before he's trusted to manage both horse and lance together. Now and then, a horse balks, a sudden shadow, the clang of a dropped bucket, the distant bark of a dog. Any of these can send even the steadiest mount dancing sideways. When it happens, a boy's heart jumps into his throat. He squeezes his knees, pulls the reins tight, tries to remember the master's constant refrain. Stay calm, stay firm. A thrown squire is a bruised squire. Or worse, a squire who limps for weeks. His lessons shifting from the saddle to the slower chores of polishing armor and sweeping the yard. Sometimes, the practice ring bears witness to a fall. A boy misjudges his balance, the horse shies, and suddenly there is a thud, the dull, sick sound of a body hitting dirt. The fallen boy gasps, eyes wide with the shock of breath knocked out. The master's stick taps the fence impatiently. Up, he says, voice even but sharp. Again, there is no sympathy in the yard, only the expectation that a future knight learns to stand, to remount, to trust the horse anew no matter how badly it bucked him off. The squire shifts in his saddle, legs already trembling from gripping the palfrey sides. The leather rubs his inner thighs raw, his boots slip in the stirrups when sweat dampens the straps. And yet, with every circuit of the paddock, every clumsy turn and corrected tug of the rein, he feels the smallest hint of confidence grow, a whisper of understanding that this animal beneath him is not simply a tool but a partner, a creature with a mind of its own, a weight that must be guided, not forced. Between drills, the squires rest at the fence, still in the saddle, sharing whispered reminders. Lean forward on the uphill. Dante, pull so hard on the bit. Keep your heels down when you turn. These scraps of advice pass from boy to boy like secret charms, each learned through bruises, near falls, and the rare nod of approval from the master. When the sun reaches its peak overhead, the horses blow hot breath into the air, flecks of foam gathering at their bits. The paddock dust settles into every crease of the squire's tunic, clinging to sweat-damp hair and the raw skin at his ankles. A steward calls them to dismount. Boots hit the dirt one by one. Hands run over the horses' necks, patting flanks that twitch in quiet exhaustion. Before he leads his horse back to the stable, the squire pauses. He rests his forehead briefly against the palfrey's mane, feeling the steady warmth beneath the coarse hair, listening to the animal's heartbeat echo his own. A bond forged not with honeyed words or gentle rides in meadows, but with hours of dusty circles, the threat of falling, and the quiet promise that trust must flow both ways. With the horse led back to its stall, the squire lingers to brush out sweat marks, loosen the girth, and offer a few words that only horse and boy truly understand. The ring stands quiet behind him now, the churned earth bearing the marks of a morning's hard lessons. Yet the dust will settle, the hoofprints will fade, and tomorrow it will begin again. In this simple, repetitive work, The sway of the saddle, the tug of reins, the faint tremor in legs. Dad, cling too tightly at first and learn slowly to yield. The squire shapes a strength that cannot be seen in his small frame, yet will one day carry him steady and sure into the world beyond the paddock fence. By the time the squire slips out of the paddock, his boots caked in churned dust, the sun hangs high overhead. The training yard hums with a quieter energy now. Some boys lean against the shade of the wall, nursing fresh bruises. Others gather water from the barrel near the gate, cupping cool handfuls to splash over flushed cheeks. But at the center of it all, like the axle of a great turning wheel, stands the He is not the largest man in the yard, nor the loudest in his orders, but every word carries the weight of iron. Every glance sharpens the edges of the boys who live under his relentless gaze. He paces the yard with a stick tucked under one arm, its tip darkened by years of tapping out rhythm and correction alike. Sometimes it is the bite of a blade, sometimes the sting of this stick, that reminds a boy of what he failed to guard. But always, the lesson lands. The squire has felt that tap on his shoulder when he dropped his guard, the quick crack across his knuckles when his grip slipped loose on the hilt of his training sword. Bruises from the stick fade fast. The lesson does not. The master is not young. His hair is a thatch of iron and ash, cropped short to keep sweat from blinding him. A thin scar cuts across one brow, disappearing into the bristle of his hairline. Some say, of his own days as a squire, though he does not speak of such things. His tunic, plain and dark, shows the shape of a man built for endurance rather than display. There are no jeweled rings on his fingers, no gilded spurs at his heels. His authority is not worn but felt, in the air that stills when he steps near, in the way boys straighten their backs and choke off complaints before they slip past dry lips. The squire watches him now from a short distance, practiced sword still clutched in his hand. He sees how the master moves among the boys, not with the hurried steps of a servant or the heavy swagger of a knight boasting before a feast, but with a patient, watchful tread. He notices everything. The way a squire's left foot drags in the dust, the nervous habit of shifting a blade from hand to hand when he thinks no one is looking. A raised brow here, a tap of the stick there. These are his words, as much as the barked commands that echo off the yard stone walls. Again, he calls now, and the line of squires straightens like reeds caught in a stiff wind. The squire takes his place, feet braced, knees slightly bent, sword lifted, shoulders burned from the morning's drills, and the rough edge of the wooden hilt bites at the raw spot near his palm. Still, the master gives no quarter for sore arms or weary backs. Repetition, he says, is the root of mastery, and so they repeat. Swing, block, recover. Swing, block, recover. The master walks behind them, his stick tapping a steady beat that burrows into the squire's mind, until it becomes the pulse of his movements. Now and then, he stops to correct a boy's posture, pushing a knee wider, tilting a chin up, pressing a hand more firmly over the hilt. He does this with the same care one might adjust a faulty hinge or tighten a loose strap. The boys are tools to be honed, not in cruelty, but in necessity. For a squire, the master-at-arms is both tormentor and protector. It is he who ensures a boy's swing is true, that his feet do not betray him with clumsy stumbles, that the shield he lifts will not splinter at the first strike. The master does not waste praise. When it comes, a curt nod, a grunt of approval, it lands heavier than any insult ever could. The squire remembers the first time the master's eyes lingered on him and did not find fault. It was a small moment, but it burned warm in his chest for days after, a hidden coal that kept him going when bruises bloomed and hope felt thin. Once, not long ago, the squire saw the master spar with a visiting knight, a demonstration for the lord and his guests. No heavy armor, no gleaming plumes, just two men in padded jerkins, wooden swords in hand. At first, the knight circled with confident steps, his blade sweeping and wide, showy arcs that drew murmurs from the onlookers. The master stood still, eyes narrow, feet planted, as though rooted to the yard itself. When the clash came, it was like thunder muffled by snow, sharp and quick, then gone. The knight swung. The master slipped a blow, stepped inside, tapped his sword against the knight's chest in a mocking salute. It was over before the watching squires could draw breath. No laughter, no taunt, just the master's eyes shifting back to his boys, as if to say, watch, learn, do not be fooled by Back in the yard, the squire feels the master's eyes on him now, measuring his stance, weighing his swing. His arms tremble with the strain of so many hours. Sword drills, archery, riding, now drills again. He wants to falter, to drop the sword and flex his fingers until the burn fades, but the stick taps the ground once, and he remembers. The master sees. Always. Sometimes, in the quiet hours, the boys whisper about him. They wonder if he was once a squire like them, bruised, frightened, longing for praise. They wonder what battles he's seen, what knights he served, what glories he traded for the grey life of training another man's sons. No one knows for certain. The master does not share tales of old victory. His story is written in the line of his shoulders, the steady press of his voice, the patient, tireless way he drills each lesson until it seeps into bone and blood. When the sun dips lower, the master calls a halt. Swords lower, breaths come in, ragged gulps. The yard feels different in these moments. Less a battlefield, more a church where sweat and discipline are the prayers offered to a god of steel and duty. The squire rubs at a fresh welt on his forearm, the skin already turning purple beneath the dirt. The master paces before them, eyes flitting from face to face. He says nothing at first, letting the silence settle. Then, in a voice softer than any of them expect, he says, "Remember this ache. It will serve you better than any feast or fine cloak." With that, he turns away, leaving the squires to gather themselves, to whisper their relief that the day's worst is over. And yet, beneath that relief lies something else. A quiet seed planted in each bruised body. A spark of respect that flickers every time they feel the throb of a fresh bruise. They know, even if they would never say it aloud, that the master at arms is the reason they will stand steady when their time comes. His sharp words, his tap of the stick, his unyielding eyes. All these are the forge in which they are shaped. The squire lifts his practice sword one last time, feeling its familiar weight before returning it to the rack. He glances at the master, who stands with his back turned, watching the sun slip behind the keep's high walls. For a heartbeat, the boy wonders what the master thinks in these moments. If he sees in each boy the knight he might become, or if he simply counts the days until another dawn brings another line of unpolished, eager faces. Either way, the squire knows tomorrow will begin just as today did, with the master's voice cutting the dawn like a blade, calling him back to the yard, the ring, the stick. And in that endless, unchanging routine, he finds a strange comfort. For what else is the making of a knight, if not the patient work of a man who has seen what comes of an unsteady blade? Segment 3, Part 1. Running errands, the silent threads that bind the cut. The clang of wooden swords fades, and the dust of the training yard settles into the seams of the squires. Tunics, another kind of duty, begins. One that takes no armor or blade, yet shapes a boy just as surely as any bruised arm or barked command. Errands, small tasks, each one as unremarkable as a dropped pin. Yet together they form the fabric that holds the castle together. A squire does not only train to fight, he is a messenger, a porter, a shadow that slips between chamber and hall, carrying scraps of parchment and whispered words, seeing everything yet always unseen. Imagine the squire now, shoulders stiff from drills, feet still aching from the muddy yard, standing at the bottom of a winding stone stair. In his hand, a folded scrap of parchment sealed with a blob of red wax. The steward thrust it at him without explanation, only that it must reach the captain of the guard before the sun dips behind the west wall. No delay, no excuses. So, he climbs. The steps spiral upward, worn smooth by countless boots. A torch guttering in an iron bracket throws shadows that dance like ghosts on the narrow walls. He counts the steps by feel, not because he wants to, but because when the legs burn and the breath grows short, the mind finds strange ways to pass the time. At the top, he pauses. A short corridor lined with arrow slits leads to the guardroom. The door is thick oak, studded with iron. Voices murmur behind it, low, rough laughter, and the scrape of dice across a table. He raises a fist and knocks twice, waiting for the familiar growl of the guard captain. The door cracks open just enough to reveal a sliver of the captain's scarred face. A grunt and nod. The squire holds out the parchment. No words pass between them. None are needed. The paper disappears into the captain's hand, the door swings shut again, and the boy is alone with his echoing footsteps. Down the stairs now, 2 at a time. The errand took minutes, but every minute counts. The master-arms watches for tardy boys as keenly as he watches for a dropped guard or a sloppy stance. A squire who returns late from a run, who claims he lost his way or found the corridor crowded, earns no sympathy. The stick will find his shoulders as swiftly as it finds his wrist in the yard. Back in the hole, another summons waits. A lady's maid stands near the hearth, eyes downcast, yet sharp enough to catch him the moment he reappears. She gestures him over, her bundle of linen and delicate silks wrapped in muslin. To the laundry she murmurs, and tell the washerwomen that Lady Aveline expects these back by moonrise. Another flight of steps, this time down to the lower yard. The scent changes as he descends. From the clean bite of torch smoke to the warmer, sour temps of washwater, lye, and steam. The laundry yard is a separate world. A chorus of scrubbing brushes, the slap of wet cloth against wooden boards, the creak of copper pots boiling over low fires. He passes the bundle to a broad-shouldered washerwoman, her sleeves rolled high above elbows, chapped red by cold water. She nods once, inspecting the silks for stains that might mean extra coin, or extra blame. The squire stands still, hands clasped behind him, waiting for her grunt of dismissal. No please or thank you here, only the unspoken understanding that the boy who brings the laundry may one day wear fine cloth himself. But for now, he stands in the steam and lye like any other servant. Some errands take him beyond the castle's gates. Not every squire is trusted with these, but an older boy, steady on his feet, quick in his wits, might be sent to the village just beyond the outer wall. There, the cobbled lane winds between crooked timber houses. Chickens scuttle underfoot. A mongrel dog dozes in the sun, stirring only to snap at flies. The squire's boots crunch through straw and old hay as he heads to the butcher for salted meat or to the small forge for a replacement link for a broken mail shirt. In the village, the squire is both known and unseen. A scrap of the castle's shadow moving among people whose lives are both closer to the soil and strangely freer than his own. Sometimes a child peeks out from behind a wooden door, eyes wide at the sight of the boy, in his simple tunic, dagger at his hip. Not quite a man, but more than the barefoot children who chase each other through muddy lanes. If he lingers too long, the steward's tongue will find him, so he moves quickly. A nod to the smith, a few coins pass from gloved hand to grimy palm, the heat of the forge searing his cheeks when he leans close to inspect the new link, still faintly warm from the hammer's kiss. Once, on such an errand, he passes the village green where older men sit, their bones bent by years at the plough, gossiping softly about the lord's taxes or the rumor of a distant skirmish on the border. They see the boy, the castle's mark on his shoulders, and some look with envy, some with pity. They know what he does not yet fully understand, that a life in armor means a life of service, no matter how fine the spurs he might wear one day. Errands rarely bring praise. They are thankless, invisible, yet they carry lessons all the same. The squire learns which corridors echo with the footsteps of people worth avoiding, which doorways are best passed by in silence, which words to hold in his mouth until the right ear bends to hear them. He learns the soft art of discretion, that what he hears in the guardroom, the laundry, the village lane must stay locked behind his lips. Loose talk is a boy's mistake. Silence is a man's shield. When dusk falls, his boots are dusty, the inside of his tunic damp with sweat. His arms bear no new bruises from the stick today, yet his legs ache from climbing stairs and crossing courtyards. His mind hums with a quiet pride. No one sees him stumble. No one calls his name with that edge of disappointment that stings more than any blow. He slips into the barracks as the sky darkens, his shadow stretching long across the stone floor. Other squires wait there, some still wiping training dust from their hair, others whispering about tomorrow's practice or the rumor of a new page arriving from a far-off manor. He says nothing, only loosens his belt, tucks the day's memories behind tired eyelids, and lets the world slip into the hush that waits between dawns. And so the errands bind him to this place. The small, unremarkable journeys that teach him the castle's hidden roads, the careful shape of words, unspoken, the quiet strength of one who carries, not just messages, but the trust of those who never look back to see him go. Imagine now the castle's great hall at the hour between dusk and dark, when the stone walls still hold the day's warmth, yet the rushlights flicker one by one along the heavy beams overhead, a place of feasts and loud laughter when the lord entertains his guests. But tonight, it is quieter, only the household gathered for an evening meal, voices lowered after the day's long toil. Into this hush steps the squire, his boots scuff lightly on the flagstones worn smooth by generations of footsteps. Ladies, knights in polished mail, servants shuffling trays from buttery to hearth. The squire's presence here is like the faint whisper of a draught, felt more than seen, passing by unnoticed. He crosses to the long oak table that runs the length of the hall. Its scars tell their own stories. Knife marks from careless hands, ink stains from parchment hastily spread during tense councils, dark rings left by wine cups set down too heavily. Above, a tapestry hangs limp against the chill seeping through the outer walls, its faded threads showing knights and dragons, locked in an eternal struggle more glamorous than the one that shapes the boys who serve beneath it. The squire's first task is to help lay the table. Platters of dark bread, coarse loaves cut into thick slices that soak up broth and meat drippings alike, trenchers carved from stale rounds, each one a makeshift plate to hold stewed venison or boiled fish when the meal begins. He moves in silence, guided by his stewards, quick nods, setting knives beside each place. Each blade is duller than the swords he spends his days with, but in this hall, a slip of the hand is just as likely to draw blood. At the lord's end of the table, the places are set with finer care. A polished goblet here, a folded scrap of linen there. The squire wipes his fingertips on his tunic before setting these pieces down, mindful that a smear of stable dust or oil from the armory might leave a mark too costly to explain away. When the door creaks wide, a small parade enters. The lord first, cloak trailing behind him like a ripple of dusk, his voice warm but heavy with the day's burdens. His knight, the squire's master, follows at his shoulder, armor exchanged for a padded tunic, yet posture stiff from hours of wear. A few lesser nobles trail after, their talk low and sharp, news of a distant skirmish, a neighboring baron's insult, the inevitable grumble of taxes and tithes that never quite stretch far enough. The squire stands behind his knight's chair, eyes lowered but ears pricked for every small command that might slip past the edge of conversation. A missing cup, a trencher set askew, a wine pitcher run dry. Any of these, if unnoticed, might bring the stewardess' disapproval down on the boy who let such a flaw stand in the candleless glow. Dinner is no grand banquet tonight. Simple stews bubble in iron pots near the hearth, stirred by kitchen hands who keep one ear on the lord, as laughter and the other on the spit that squeaks slowly as it turns. Now and then, the squire slips forward to clear a used cup, to pour more wine into an empty goblet, to brush a crumb from the table's edge with a corner of his sleeve. He is invisible, yet the small weight of each action ties him tighter to the hall's quiet order. Sometimes, his eyes flick up. He sees the knight's hand drumming on the table, the fingers thick with calluses earned long ago in a campaign. The squire knows only from hushed barracks tales. He sees the lady's ring gleaming as she gestures, the firelight catching on the stones like tiny embers. These details drift through the boy's mind like threads in a tapestry. He does not yet know how to read. One evening, a visiting noble leans back in his chair, voice slurred with too much wine, and gestures lazily at the squire. Look at him. He laughs to his companions, thin as a switch, yet thinks he'll wear spurs one day. His words drip disdain, yet the squire does not flinch. He grips the wine jug tighter, eyes down, the flush that rises in his cheeks hidden by the shadows cast by the rushlight above. The knight says nothing, but when the cup is filled, he nods once to the boy, a small gesture, a silent shield. It is enough. The squire bows his head and moves away, the warmth of that nod settling in his chest like a quiet promise that someone has seen, even when others choose not to. After the plates are cleared, the squire helps scrape the trenchers into the scraps bucket. What remains will feed the dogs, the pigs in the yard, the rats that slip between the rushes underfoot. He wipes the table with a damp cloth, the scent of spilled wine mingling with the sharp tamps of the stewed meat that still clings to the boards. The hall empties slowly. Nobles drift away, voices softer now. Plans for tomorrow's hunt or the next day? Council murmured as they pass under the tapestry as watchful dragons. The squire stands a while longer, waiting for the steward's final nod. Only then does he gather the cups, stack the dull knives, and slip away through the service door that leads back into the hush of the castle as slower passageways. In these small, unseen chores, the squire learns lessons not taught in the yard. How to listen without hearing, how to stand still yet move quickly, how to be as invisible as smoke when words grow sharp and laughter turns cruel. He knows that one careless gesture can ripple outward. A dropped cup, a spilled trencher, a moment of too bold eye contact that invites a reprimand his bruised shoulders do not need. Yet when he returns to his narrow pallet in the barracks, he carries a sense of quiet pride. Each plate wiped, each cup filled, Each sharp word swallowed is another small stitch binding him to this place. Someday, he thinks, he will sit at a table of his own, his cup poured by a boy who stands silent behind his chair. But tonight, he rests his head on his folded arm and lets the day's chores fade into the hush that hums like a lullaby through the stone walls. Outside the window, the wind carries the scent of the stables, the kitchen hearth, the smoke from the halls, guttering torches. Inside, the squire sleeps, his hands still faintly marked by the press of blade and broom alike. A boy shaped by service, one small task at a time. When the last scraps are cleared from the hall, the hearth's embers banked low, and the castle's courtyards slip under the soft hush of moonlight, the squire's day does not simply end, while others lay their heads on straw pillows and drift into sleep. The squire's work often stretches into the hours when even the bats in the rafters pause their restless flight. It begins with the hush of steps on cold stone. The boy moves down dim corridors, the only light a flickering rushlight that dances shadows along the walls. His boots brush old rushes scattered across the flagstones to soak up the damp and the dirt of the day's passing feet. In these moments, the castle feels both endless and strangely small, a series of narrow passageways and quiet doorways that lead him from duty to duty. Tonight, he stands his turn on watch by his knight's chamber. The heavy oaken door stands closed, a thin slice of candlelight slipping out from the gap at the bottom. Inside, the knight finishes reading the day's messages or leans his head back in weary silence. Thoughts turn to the morrow's council or the next hunt, the next border skirmish, the next feast that must be endured with polite words and a careful blade at hand. The squire shifts his weight from foot to foot. The passage is cold here. A draught sneaks through a narrow arrow slit, rattling the edge of a faded tapestry that hangs limply in the gloom. He rubs his palms together, careful not to let the leather scabbard at his hip knock against the wall. Any sound that breaks the hush might bring a soft reprimand from behind that door, or worse, draw the attention of the master-at-arms making his own rounds to ensure no boy sleeps when he should stand. He listens instead. The quiet rasp of the knight's chair moving against the floor, the faint creak of parchment, the soft clink of a cup being set aside. Outside the slit window, an owl calls once, its voice thin and distant in the star-pricked dark. He wonders if the bird watches him as keenly as he watches this door, a silent witness to a boy who stands because standing is what is asked of him. Hours on watch can feel like hours lived inside a dream. The mind drifts, only to snap back when a foot slides too far, when the weight of weariness makes the eyelids droop. The squire fights the pull of sleep with small tricks. A pinch to his forearm, a shift of weight from one leg to the other, the reciting of his lessons under his breath like a prayer, the parts of a sword, the names of every link in a mail shirt, the knots that bind a bridle just so, each loop a memory of Dawn's work in the stable. Sometimes he carries messages, even now, called from his post by the knight's quiet summons, a slip of parchment to be delivered to the steward, a whispered request for an extra cup of wine, brought up from the buttery, a soft order that sends the boy down narrow stairs, feet landing soundless on steps that know his tread better than any torch could guide. Other nights, the watch means standing at the outer wall, alongside a true guard, whose chainmail shifts with every breath. Here, the squire's eyes must search the darkness for shadows that do not belong, the glint of moonlight on steel, the subtle ripple of brush moved by more than wind. It is a lesson in patience and fear alike, for the night beyond the wall holds more secrets than any warm hearth or candlelit hall. His cloak does little to keep the cold from seeping into his bones. He pulls it tighter around his shoulders, feeling the damp edge of the wool where it drags near the ground. He imagines the warmth of the barracks, the rough blanket waiting on his pallet, the low murmur of other boys who have already slipped into dreams of tournaments and future glory. But here, under the watchful stars, he knows his place is to stand, eyes open, breath puffing in small ghosts that drift out into the dark. Not all nights passed in silence. There are evenings when a guest arrives late, a horse's hooves ringing out on the cobbles like a hammer on the forge. The squire may be called to help lead the steed to the stable, to hold the reins while a stable hand checks for stones lodged in a hoof, to carry a saddle that weighs more than a winter's worth of firewood. The animal's warmth seeps through his gloves, a welcome heat against the chill that bites his fingers raw. Once, he is summoned to fetch the healer for a night, who returns from a skirmish just beyond the village. An arrow lodged shallow in his shoulder, blood seeping through the padded gambeson in a spreading bloom. The squire holds the torch high as the healer works, his own stomach twisting at the smell of iron and sweat. He focuses instead on the flames dance, how it flickers with each draft that slips through the open hall door. He learns to stand still, to swallow questions that have no place here, to keep his eyes on the task that steadies his mind when the world turns sharp and uncertain, when the watch ends, be it at midnight or nearer dawn. The squire's feet are numb, his shoulders heavy with hours spent holding himself upright against the soft pull of sleep. He bows his head when the knight steps from the chamber, eyes shadowed by candlelight, brief nod given in place of thanks. Gratitude is a rare coin here, yet the boy feels its faint trace all the same. Down in the barracks, he finds his pallet still waiting, the rough straw beneath a coarse blanket that scratches at his skin. He lies there, boots left near the door, dagger at his side, ears filled with the hush that follows a day's labor done. In that hush lives a small stubborn pride, that he kept his post, that he moved as the shadows move, that he carried the night's secrets on his shoulders and laid them down only when the first birds begin their tentative song outside the narrow window. Sleep, when it comes, feels more like surrender than rest. The squire lets it take him without fight, his body curled tight against the stone's chill. The ache in his legs a reminder that even in the hours when the castle dreams, a boy like him stands watch. Not yet a knight, not yet a master of blade or steed, but a keeper of doorways and darkness, a quiet witness to the hours when service means simply being there when no one else will. The echo of boots on stone fades, the yard grows still under the watchful moon, and the warmth of the hearths above sinks into the thick stone walls like an old secret. Here, below the halls of banners and noble boasts, lies the small world where the squires let their shoulders drop, their guards lower, and their bruisers breathe. The room is narrow and low. Wooden bunks line each wall, simple frames that creak under restless bodies shifting on straw pallets. The air is thick with the smell of damp wool, sweat, and the faint iron tamps of fresh scrapes hidden beneath tunics, hastily stripped off and draped over the foot of each bed to dry by morning. The squire sinks onto his own pallet with a muted sigh, the straw rustling beneath his weight. The rough ticking pokes through in places, pricking at his elbows and ribs, but he hardly feels it now. He stretches out, legs stiff from the day's drills, the hours spent gripping reins and shifting his weight with each turn of a restless horse. His fingers still ache with the memory of the bowstring's bite, the heavy practice sword that felt twice its weight as dusk fell. Beside him, another boy rolls over, hissing softly as his shoulder brushes the wall. A bruise blooms there, dark and proud, the mark of a block missed or a swing caught just slightly too late. The boy touches it with a wince, then glances at the squire, a grin flickering in the dim light cast by the single rushlight that sputters near the door. "Better than a broken nose," he whispers, his voice rough with exhaustion yet edged with pride. The squire huffs a quiet laugh in reply. Words are few here, not out of fear, but because they are spent, every one squeezed dry by the demands of the day. Still, they talk in snatches, half-murmured jokes, teasing about clumsy footwork, the quiet, unspoken comfort that someone else was there to see you fail and will stand beside you when you try again tomorrow. In this hush, their brotherhood breathes. It lives in the soft thud of a shared loaf of bread broken in the corner, stolen from the stewardess table to fill the belly that the kitchen's course meal could not quite satisfy. It curls up in the shared blanket dragged from an older boy's bunk when the night's chill sinks into bones, too thin to hold it back. They compare bruises like old warriors counting scars. A purple welt on a forearm earns a low whistle of admiration. A scab on the chin invites a gentle tap, just enough to sting. Just enough to remind them that pain here is never just pain. It is proof of effort, of a day survived, of a step closer to the day when they will wear their own spurs and no longer stand behind a chair or wait at a door. Now and then, one boy lifts his head to check the door. Even here, in the barracks where they are allowed to loosen the knots of duty, they know the master-at-arms might appear at any moment. He has done so before, slipping in like a ghost to catch them in sleep before their work is done, or to remind them, with a sharp word, that laughter has its limits when discipline must be fed with silence. When the door stays closed, the whispers return. Small stories pass between bunks, tales lifted from the older boys who claim they once saw their nights break. 3 lances in a single tilt or ride through the thick of battle with only a dented helm and a prayer. Such boasts become bedtime songs here, half fantasy, half promise. Each boy listens, eyes fluttering shut, even as they imagine the armor they might one day wear, the banner they might one day carry, the stable chores and scholarly runs replaced by the weight of a sword that is truly their own. Sometimes, talk drifts to home. A village glimpsed through the rain-soaked hood of a cloak, a mother's hand rough from the washboard, a father's shape glimpsed through the forge's smoke. Some squires speak of family as though it lies just beyond the castle gate, waiting to welcome them back when their training is done. Others carry that place only as a distant ache, buried beneath the days and nights that stretch on in the same rhythm of service and striving. In these stolen moments, the walls of the barracks shrink, growing small enough to hold just them. The bruised shoulders, the raw palms, the dreams that flutter like rushlight flames. On the verge of sleep, one boy hums an old tune from his village, voice no stronger than the breeze that slips through the cracked shutter. Another picks up the words, haltingly, then lets them fade, the melody curling into the straw as if to nest there until morning. The squire shifts on his pallet. He listens to the steady breathing around him, the muffled cough from the youngest boy at the far end, the soft snore that earns a quiet chuckle before it fades. He feels the warmth of bodies nearby, the fragile shield of closeness that holds off the night's chill better than any cloak. Here they are not only servants in the hall shadows, in the yard, they are boys, brothers, bound by dirt and sweat and the shared certainty that no one else could understand these long days quite the same way. He closes his eyes at last. In his mind, he sees the training yard empty and wide under a pale dawn, the straw dummies waiting, the practice swords lined like loyal dogs against the fence. He knows tomorrow will bring more bruises, more barked orders, more errands up stone stairs and across muddy courtyards. But for this short slice of darkness, the ache in his shoulders is softened by the presence of the boy who shares his blanket, Essage the murmur of a story, half-finished the promise that he does not bear these trials alone. Outside, the wind rattles the shutter again, but inside, the hush settles around them like a blessing. In the castle's heart, a place built to hold men in iron, and stone in place, a handful of squires lie tangled in straw and sweat, dreaming together that someday the world will know their names. But tonight, they are simply tired boys, and for this one moment, that is more than enough. Segment 4. Part 1. Accidents and Injuries. The hidden bruises of a squire's life. Sun breaks over the castle walls and spills light onto the churned earth of the training yard. It does not care for the bruises, hidden beneath rough linen sleeves. To be a squire is to learn that every small wound is part of the bargain, a quiet promise that the path to night is paved not with glory, but with the dull ache of tendons, stretched to far bones jarred by practice blades, skin split open by mistakes made before watchful eyes. It begins with the simplest misstep, a slip on rain-slick stone when leading a horse to the paddock. A hoof lands where it shouldn't tee, and the sharp edge of pain shoots through the boy's foot, a reminder that even the animals he tends are heavy with consequence. He limps 4 days after, boots too tight around the swelling, each step an echo of that careless moment when the reins were held too loose, the hoof too quick. Then there are the drills, the endless clash of wooden swords against padded straw or each other. The yard's dust clings to sweat-damp hair, grit works its way into fresh scrapes, and every swing carries the chance of an accidental strike. A practice blade turned just so that it catches a knuckle, a shoulder, the soft skin along a jawline. A careless guard leaves ribs exposed. The dull thud of wood meeting bone follows, and later, under the tunic, a dark bruise blooms like ink spilled across a page. Not every injury is dramatic. Many are quiet, almost invisible. The small cuts from oiling the knight's armor, a slip of the awl, a careless scrape against a jagged edge of chainmail, the raw blisters that rise when a bowstring rubs the same spot on a thumb until it splits, the ache that creeps into the shoulders after hours, holding a horse steady while the farrier works. The quiver of tired legs that refuse to hold firm when they are called back to the yard yet again. When a boy stumbles, he learns to rise quickly. A fall in the mud is better than a fall under steel, the master says, so better to bruise now than bleed later. There are no soothing bombs waiting when the day's drills end. No gentle words, only the rough cloth of a tunic pressed against a raw scrape, the hiss of breath through clenched teeth as another boy pours water from a cracked jug to wash out the grit. Sometimes, the castle's small healer is summoned, a woman with a basket of herbs tucked under her shawl, the smell of dried lavender and pungent vinegar trailing in her wake. She bends over bruised arms and swollen joints with hands that know exactly how much pressure to apply to find the heart of the pain. Her voice is soft, but her touch is not, and the boys who flinch under her probing fingers learn quickly that a small hurt now can spare a greater one later. In the barracks, these injuries become stories. A swollen knuckle wrapped in stained linen invites the quiet envy of a younger boy who has yet to earn his first true bruise. A scrape along the scalp hidden under a mop of unkempt hair becomes a tale of a near miss during a practice bout, exaggerated in the telling, softened by laughter that grows louder when the master at arms is well out of earshot. Yet not every wound fades so easily. A twisted ankle can linger, a sharp reminder that a misstep on a loose stone can mean weeks of limping through errands that do not wait for bones to heal. A poorly healed cut can reopen, the thin scar pulling apart when a boy lifts a saddle that is just slightly too heavy for his narrow shoulders. In these moments, the squire learns to measure his own limits. Pride pushes him to keep pace with boys larger, stronger, older, but the body whispers its truths in the deep hours of the night when the barracks are quiet. He feels the throb of a strained muscle, the ache in a wrist that never quite straightened after a rough fall. He rolls onto his side, cheek pressed to the straw, and breathes through the pain, reminding himself that each small hurt is a lesson tucked under the skin. There is a strange comfort in these hurts. They are tokens of effort, silent proof that he is forging himself into something harder than he was the day before. They are never shown to the night. A squire's pride holds that his service should appear smooth, unflinching, no matter what. Bruises lie hidden under the sleeve that holds a bridle or the hand that lifts a shield. And so the cycle repeats. The squire rises with the dawn, the ache in his shoulder a quiet companion. He pulls on his tunic carefully over a healing scrape, flexes fingers still stiff from a strike that landed too hard. He tests his weight on an ankle that wobbles, then carries him to the stables where the horse waits, unaware of the boy's limp. If he complains, he knows the master's voice will be as cold as the wind that sweeps through the yard's gate. Pain teaches more than comfort ever could. It is not said with cruelty, but with the flat truth of a man who has lived long enough to see how many boys never learn that lesson until it is far too late. As the day's chores unfold, the squire wears his bruises like hidden armor, not for show, but for the quiet certainty that tomorrow they will fade, and new ones will bloom in their place. Each mark, each tender spot, each wind's hidden behind a steady step is a stitch in the long, slow cloth of becoming. It is never easy. It is rarely fair, but in this simple, brutal ritual of small injuries and quiet endurance, a squire learns the oldest truth. A knight's strength is not built on the moments when his blade shines, but in the hours when his body bends and does not break. And when the hush of night settles over the castle once more, the squire lets the ache lull him to sleep, the dull throb a reminder that, though the world does not yet know his name, his bones carry the shape of what he hopes to become. Imagine now the hush that fills the training yard when a mistake crosses a line too clear to ignore. The sun might still hang high, the dust might still swirl under booted feet, yet the moment when punishment comes feels like dusk pressed into the middle of the day. A small shadow cast over every boy who watches, who knows that tomorrow it could be him. It begins so as a boy stumbles through a drill, his footwork sloppy, the swing of his practice sword wide and careless, or his chores are rushed. A horse brushed so hastily that mud clings under the saddle straps, an armor buckle left unchecked so that a hinge snaps when the knight lifts his arm. Or perhaps, the boy simply speaks when silence is required, a joke muttered behind the master-at-arms' back, a laugh that rings out when the lord passes by. These slips are small, yet they matter. In a world built on discipline and service, even the smallest crack in the wall must be patched at once, lest it grow wide enough to topple the tower it holds up. The squire stands alone in the yard now. The others drift back, forming a loose circle around the their practice swords lowered, the rhythm of drills replaced by a hush that pricks at the back of the neck like cold mist. No one wants to watch, yet every boy knows he must. The master-at-arms does not shout. His voice, low and iron-edged, cuts deeper than any raised fist could. He lists the error in words, clipped short. You left the bridle strap frayed. You failed to oil the links near the shoulder. You spoke when you should have listened. Each word lands with the weight of the stick that rests on his shoulder. The same stick that taps out the cadence of every swing, every block, every lesson drilled into muscle and bone. Punishment is never a secret here. To teach one boy is to remind the rest. Sometimes it is the stick, a sharp crack across the knuckles, a stinging rap on the shoulders. Enough to send a hiss of breath between clenched teeth, but never enough to leave more than a bruise that fades before the week is done. The stick's bite is precise, controlled, like the blade it stands in for, a lesson that pain, wielded wisely, teaches more than cruelty ever could. Other times, the punishment is worse. An extra shift on night watch when eyes already sagged with exhaustion. Chores doubled. The same armor polished twice. The stable mucked out when every muscle pleads for sleep. A boy who drags his feet learns quickly that tired hands are steadier than hands that tremble from fear of disgrace. Worse than the stick, worse than the work is the silent punishment. The withheld nod from the master. The quiet disappointment in a knight's eyes when he notices a slack strap or a dull edge on his sword. Praise is rare enough. Its absence feels like a hollow echo in the chest, a bruise that lies deeper than skin. In the barracks, the boys speak of these moments only in hushed tones, the words drifting into the straw as they lie on their pallets. They compare the sting of the stick, the number of lashes meted out for a dropped blade or a sullen answer. They test each other's courage with tales of who bore it best. The boy who did not flinch when the stick landed. The one who held his chin high when told to redo an hour's worth of polishing by rushlight in the armory's cold hush. There are lines, of course. A harsh master who punishes too freely risks the Lord's disfavor if a promising boy is broken before he is shaped. It is a balance older than the castle walls. Too soft, and a boy grows lazy. Too cruel, and the squire's spirit frays, like a bridle strap left out in the rain. Sometimes, the master's punishment becomes a quiet kindness. A boy too proud to admit weakness finds himself kept late after the yard empties. The stick tapping out a softer lesson. Your grip is wrong. Your swing opens you wide. Watch your left foot. In these moments, the sting of discipline becomes the bomb of attention. The small seed of skill planted deep in soil, turned fertile by bruises and fatigue. For the squire, fear is not the sharp fear of battle. It is the slow burn of knowing that disgrace waits at the edge of every careless step. A mistake that reaches the knight's ear, that brings the steward's sigh or the master's cold stare, plants a thorn in the boy's mind that pricks him awake when he might drift into laziness. He learns to check every buckle twice, to brush the horse's coat until it gleams under the thin dawn light. Not all punishments are deserved. A squire sometimes bears the sharp word meant for another, or feels the stick for a slip that was not his to fix. Yet even this teaches him something vital. Service is not fair. The world beyond these walls will care little for whether the knight's armor slipped because of the squire's fault or the blacksmith's poor rivet. The weight lands on his shoulders, all the same. And so the boy stands, shoulders squared under the master's stare, knuckles raw from the stick's tap, eyes steady even when his pulse beats a wild rhythm in his throat. He knows tomorrow he will rise with the dawn, the lesson fresh under his skin, the fear of repeating his mistake pressing him forward when his muscles beg him to falter. In the hush that follows, the other squires drift back to their drills. The yard hums again with the clash of wood on straw, the sharp bark of orders that ring out like distant thunder. Yet, under each boy's tunic lies the echo of this moment. A quiet reminder that while bruises fade, discipline lingers, a shadow at the edge of every swing and every whispered vow to do better. Later, in the barracks, they lie side by side in the hush, sharing their stories in broken murmurs. They speak of the master's sharp eye, the stick that teaches more than it punishes, the strange relief that comes when the slate is wiped clean, and tomorrow begins anew. And as sleep folds around them like a rough blanket, they hold close this simple truth. A squire's worst fear is not the sting of the stick, but the shame of failing to earn the trust placed in his bruised and busy hands. When people imagine the lives of knights, they picture feasting halls filled with roasted meats, bright banners fluttering above long tables, and goblets brimming with rich wine. They see shining platters piled high with sweet fruits and fresh bread. They forget, or perhaps never knew, that at the far end of that table, near the draughty doorway, behind the noble guests, stand the squires, empty-bellied after dawn's chores, waiting for scraps that often never come. For a squire, hunger is a companion as faithful as his dagger. He learns it early, when he wakes in the cold grey light, and finds only a chunk of coarse bread waiting near the kitchen hearth. The loaf is yesterday's hardened overnight to a crust, so tough it cracks his teeth if he bites too fast. If he's lucky, there's a smear of cheese, the crumbly sort that clings to the knife blade more than the bread itself. Sometimes, when the cook takes pity, a ladle of thin pottage warms his palms, a broth thickened with barley and a handful of wilted greens that offer more color than comfort. This is not the food of feasts, but the fare that keeps limbs moving and minds sharp enough to remember the master-at-arms' next command. The squire eats standing by the kitchen's smoky hearth. the warmth seeping into the chill that clings to his tunic. Around him, other boys do the same, eyes down, shoulders hunched, each one hoping the bread holds him through hours of drills and errands that leave stomachs echoing by noon. When the castle's stores run lean, as they do every winter when snow piles at the courtyard gate and the roads to the village are blocked by drifts and broken cart wheels, the squires feel the pinch first. Extra meat is reserved for the Lord's table, the fatter cut salted away for when honored guests arrive, unannounced. What remains is boiled until stringy, spooned out with apologies that sound more like orders. The boys dip stale bread into the greasy broth, swallowing quick to fool their bellies into thinking they've had enough. Hunger does not come alone. It brings with it the creeping chill of damp stone and drafty halls. Rush mats scatter across the barracks floor to keep feet from freezing at night, yet the wind slides under the door no matter how tightly it's latched. The squires curl into themselves under thin blankets, sharing warmth like foxes in a den. In the hush before dawn, you can hear the muffled coughs, the sniffles that turn into rasping breaths when the cold lingers too long in the chest. When sickness comes, it moves quietly through the rows of straw pallets. A boy who wakes with a headache may find by dusk that his bones ache so fiercely he cannot lift his practice sword. Another trembles under his blanket while the others pull on their boots, cheeks flushed and eyes glassy. The master harm stern but not heartless. Sends him to the small corner near the hearth where the castle's healer sits, her hands smelling of rosemary and vinegar. Her voice a soft murmur over the pot of broth she coaxes the boy to sip. But a squire's duty does not wait for fever to break or for coughs to clear. A boy too sick to stand in the yard may still be asked to run a message to the stables or hold a horse steady while its shoes are checked for stones. No one spares him the work that must be done, for a horse must eat, a knight must ride, and the castle's slow heartbeat depends on these small, invisible tasks done by boys who cough quietly into their sleeves. Some illnesses pass as quickly as they come. A day of shivering, a night of sweat soaking into the straw, and the squire wakes with his strength returning like a tide. Others leave marks that linger long after the fever fades. A rasp in the lungs that barks at dawn is cold. Air a weakness in the legs that makes long errands up the spiral stair feel like climbing a mountain. Still, there is no talk of leaving, no question of quitting. The squire knows that each season shapes him. The cold teaches him to rise before the sun finds the frost on the courtyard flagstones. Hunger teaches him to savor what small comfort comes. The crust of fresh bread smuggled from the hall by a sympathetic kitchen maid. The warm stew that sometimes finds its way to the barracks on a night when the lordess table overflows. Illness teaches him patience, endurance, that the body bends, but with care does not break. In the barracks, the boys share what they can. A scrap of blanket draped over the boy who shakes with fever. A heel of bread saved in a pocket and slipped under a thin straw pillow when the healer turns her back. These small kindnesses bind them closer than the barked orders in the yard ever could. And when one of them is well again, the cough quieted, the strength returned to thin arms. The master-at-arms nods once, the same nod he gives when a boy blocks a blow properly for the first time. No words needed. Illness is a test of will, and a squire who passes it earns a lesson no blade can teach. So the seasons turn. Spring's thaw brings mud to the yard and fresh aches to old bruises. Summer's sun cracks lips and makes the soup pot smell sweeter than it is. Autumn's damp creeps back under the barracks door, whispering of the chill to come. Winter's hunger waits at the gate, ready to slip its fingers into the corners of the kitchen. Through it all the squire stands. By the hearth, by the night, horse, in the yard learning that glory is not born at the feasting table, but in the quiet, steady endurance of hunger, cold, and the sharp edge of sickness that does not ask if you are ready to serve. It simply tests if you will stand, and each dawn that finds him still there. Knuckles raw, belly tight, with hunger yet feet moving forward, stitches him tighter to this life he chose, this life that chose him back. When he lies on his straw pallet at night, listening to the wind curl around the stones, he feels the ache in his bones, and the last echo of the master. A stick has faded down the corridor, a different hush finds the squires, and knows, tomorrow, the stew will taste just as thin, the chill will bite just as sharp. But so will his resolve. When dusk settles like a shawl over the castle's outer walls, when the training yard dust has drifted back into its low hollows, it is not the tired silence of boys too weary to speak, nor the watchful quiet of standing guard through the night. This hush is softer, an emptiness shaped like people they do not see but carry with them all the same. For every squire in the barracks, there is a place left behind, a village hut crouched against a crooked fence, a father's forge that glowed red at dawn, a mother's soft humming over a battered wooden bowl as she kneaded dough with hands rough from the cold river water. Some squires come from places grander than this, manor houses with stained glass windows and floors swept by servants who never speak their name. But the ache is the same when the shutters close and the wind rattles the rush mats. Sometimes the longing sits quiet as a mouse. A boy rolls onto his side on the straw pallet, tucks his hands under his chin, and lets his mind wander back to the taste of oat porridge cooked just so, or the feel of a father's rough palm pressed briefly against the back of his neck before the cart carried him away. Other nights, the ache grows sharp and hot, the kind that makes a boy pull his blanket tight, blinking back tears that sting more than the bruises on his ribs ever could. A few boys clutch scraps of parchment folded small enough to fit in the palm letters from home that arrive when the roads are clear and the seasons are kind. The ink is often smudged, the words spelled poorly or cramped into crooked lines, by hands more used to a plow than a quill. But each word holds warmth. We miss you, be good, serve well, come back when you are ready. Some read these letters aloud in a whisper, their voices barely more than breath in the straw-scented dark. Others keep them pressed to their chest, the words recited silently until they know each curve of each letter by heart. Not every boy receives a letter. Some families are too poor to spare the coin for a message carried over rough roads by a cart driver with an eye for easy profit. Some have no one left at all. A father taken by fever, a mother remarried into a house that does not ask about the boy she once sent away with a kiss and a promise to wait. These boys say nothing, but their silence sits heavy when talk of home flickers through the barracks like a candle flame cupped in careful hands. In the courtyard, when errands take them near the gate, a squire sometimes lingers, eyes tracing the road that winds away into the woods. He imagines he sees a shape he knows, a father's bent shoulders, a sister's bright kerchief fluttering in the wind. He stands there a moment too long before the steward. Spark snaps him back into the present. The heavy bundle that must be carried, the message that must be run, the stall that must be swept clean before dusk, gives way to full dock. When the ache for home grows too sharp to bear alone, the squires share it in small ways. One boy hums the tune of a harvest song his mother used to sing as she gathered onions and leeks into a rough cloth sack. Another mimics his father's deep laugh, drawing a grin from boys who know that laughter often arrives cracked and quick, like thunder just before rain. They speak in half-told stories of orchards heavy with apples, streams where bare feet splashed in summer's heat, the way a chimney smoked when bread was baking just right. These stories slip into the straw and the rush mats underfoot, winding themselves around the rough beams overhead. They weave a tapestry no lord will ever see, a picture stitched together by longing and hope, and the belief that all this bruising service means something greater than the aching space left behind. Sometimes a boy dreams of home so vividly that he wakes with a taste of warm broth on his tongue, the scrape of a wooden spoon against a bowl that is not there. He lies there blinking in the low candlelight, the quiet breaths of the others around him like a low, steady lullaby. He reaches under his blanket to touch the small keepsake he has hidden, a twist of cloth that once lined his mother's sleeve, a thin strip of leather from his father's belt, a bead that slipped from a sister's necklace and now rattles softly against the dagger at his hip. Yet not every thought of home brings comfort. For some, the ache curls into resentment. A question whispered to the rushers at midnight. Why did they send me here? Do they remember me? It is a bitter seed, watered by days when the stick lands harder than usual, when the stable-s stink clings to his hair long after the horses are brushed and bedded down. He wonders if his mother would know him now, all bruised arms and raw palm, or if his father would recognize the boy whose voice grew hoarse from shouting, whose eyes sharpened under the watchful stare of the man. But these thoughts pass like storms, fierce in the moment, gone by morning. The dawn calls them back to the yard, the armory, the paddock. The horse must be fed, the blade must be oiled, the knight's banner must be checked for tears before the next ride into the hills. And in this relentless routine, the ache for home becomes less a wound and more a quiet ember, tucked deep in the chest, warming the spaces that cold discipline and hard lessons would otherwise leave empty. When the time comes, if it ever comes, and a squire is called to kneel in the yard where he learned to block and swing and stand steady, the memory of home presses closest. He will feel the rough palm on his neck again, the weight of a mother's promise that he would come back taller, stronger, more than he was when he left. He will know that every letter read until the ink wore thin, every tear pressed into straw while the others slept, was another thread tying him to the boy he once was. The boy who learned to stand, when every bruise and lash told him to stay down. For now, though he lies on his pallet, staring at the beams overhead, he lets the small ache hum through his bones. Not as a weakness, but as a reminder that one day when the horse is saddled, the blade, strapped to his hip, and the knight rides out with him at his side, he will carry, not just the lessons of the yard, but the quiet promise that he did not forget where he came from. And when sleep comes, soft as a mother's hush, it brings with it the road winding back through the woods, the orchard, heavy with fruit, the thin curl of chimney smoke that marks the place called home, the place that waits, whether he ever truly returns or not. Segment 5, Part 1. Notable Squires. The echo of names long after straw bed. You lie back and let the hush of centuries drift around you. It is easy to think that the small aches and bruises of a squire's life were lost in time, swallowed by the stone walls that saw them swing their practiced swords, polish iron buckles and bow, their heads to the same iron voice that shaped them. Yet now and then, history spares a name, a boy who rose from straw pallets and drafty barracks to stand steady beside kings and lords. These are not always the knights whose banners blaze bright in painted manuscripts, but their stories carry the same quiet truth, that even the greatest warriors once knelt in the yard, legs trembling, palms raw, hearts whispering the same question: will I ever be enough? Take the tale of William Marshall, a name whispered with a kind of reverence in every hall where old tales are told by a crackling fire. Before he became the greatest knight, before he held the reins of power when kings fell and rose again, he was just a boy of little consequence. As a child, he was given up as a hostage during a civil war that tore England apart in the 12th century. He slept on stone floors, ate scraps, and waited for a blade that never fell when the tides of conflict turned. When he was finally given the chance to serve, William Marshall learned every lesson a squire must know. He brushed his lord's horses, carried lances to the tilt-yard, and endured the blunt end of practice blades swung by older boys eager to prove themselves. He spent nights standing watch when his body begged for sleep, and dawned scrubbing the grit from mail links until his fingers split. Yet beneath that patient work lived a stubbornness that no hunger or punishment could starve out. They say that William's rise came not from one grand victory, but from countless small moments. When he stood steady where others might have faltered, he won his first armor in the lists, a tournament where squires sometimes dreamed bigger than they could swing their blades. With the battered gear of another knight claimed as prize, he stepped into the world as more than a servant, as a man whose worth was earned blow by blow. Decades later, when storms of politics and betrayal threatened the crown itself, it was Marshall's quiet loyalty that bound fractious barons and reckless kings together, like rivets holding an old helm in place. Yet if you could ask him, in some candlelit chamber far from the echoes of war, whether that iron loyalty was forged, he would likely nod, not at a battlefield, but at the yard where he once knelt arms, quivering under the watchful stick of the master. Or consider the story of Jean Lemengre, a name that flickers through the dusty pages of French chronicles like the gleam of a half-forgotten sword. Born into a noble house in 14th century France, he trained as a squire in the courts where the code of chivalry lived, not in grand speeches but in the careful polish of another man's shield. It was Boucicato, as a boy, carried his lord's banner across battlefields stained with mud and fear. He learned to ride not in the gentle paddock, but amid the smoke of skirmishes that tested his grip on the reins and his faith in the fragile protection of plate and mail. When plague swept through the towns, he saw fellow squires buried in shallow graves behind the castle stables, their dreams of knighthood carried away on the same damp wind that rattled the shutters each night. Yet Boucicaut rose, not because he was the strongest, though his feats in tournaments were legendary, but because he understood that chivalry, like a well-oiled blade, was a matter of constant care. He led armies not with the bark of orders alone, but by kneeling beside boys who polished the horses' hooves at dawn, reminding them that the greatest knight remembers the sting of early discipline. His code, so carefully shaped in the hush of barracks and the cold sweat of drills, echoed through the hearts of men long after his standard fell on distant fields, closer to the cold stones of Scotland's border castles. Squires whose names history never fully wrote still haunt the hush of old keeps, anonymous boys, their lineage lost or muddled, serve-lords who rode against the English or defended tiny keeps perched like wary hawks on rocky hills. They learned to hold the weight of a lord's quarrels, to patch torn banners with rough stitches by rushlight, and to stand guard at doors that opened onto plots and whispered betrayal. These small, unseen lives remind us that knighthood was never truly about the gleam of armor or the shine of a silver spur. It was about endurance and a fierce loyalty tested at every turn. When the older squires whispered stories of boys who once failed, who turned coward in the yard or let a horse slip its tether because sleep weighed too heavy on tired eyes, they did so not just to frighten each other but to remind themselves, it is not enough to be strong for a day, you must be steady for a lifetime. So the squire lying awake on his straw pallet, ears filled with the snores and hushed dreams of his brothers, thinks of these stories like old lullabies, not tales of glory for its own sake, but proof that greatness grows in the hush between chores and bruises. He imagines Marshall, as young and thin as he is now, lifting a battered helm to check for cracks. He imagines Bushycart sweaty and bruised in the lists, eyes fixed on a prize he could hardly yet afford to dream of. He imagines countless boys whose names drift like ghosts through the stones. Reminders at each door, each swing of the practice blade, each clumsy fall is part of something bigger. Tomorrow, the yard will welcome him again with its churned mud and patient, relentless drills. The stick will tap his knuckles when he drops his guard. The stable-s chill will seep into his bones, while he brushes out the warhorse-s flanks. Before the sun is even up, and through it all, he will hold tight to these stories. Small beacons in a world that so rarely lifts a boy from straw to silver spurs. And should he stand steady when the day finally comes? Should he earn his place at his knight's side on a battlefield or beneath a lord, as banner in the lists, he will know that his name too is stitched into this old cloth, not in bright letters for the world to see perhaps, but in the quiet echo that lingers, long after the training yard falls silent for the night. History keeps its brightest pages for kings and conquerors, those who wore crowns heavy with gold and regret, whose banners fluttered over fields painted red by their ambitions, but hidden among those pages are quieter names, carried forward not because they swung the sharpest blade, but because they stood steady when fear or temptation might have broken lesser men. Some of these were squires, boys who learned that loyalty, once given, demands everything and leaves nothing hidden. Take the story of Bertrand du Guesclin, called the Black Dog, by those who feared his cunning on the battlefields of France. Before he became Constable of France, a title that placed him second only to the king in matters of war, Bertrand was just another squire, overlooked and even mocked for his rough manners and coarse features. His father's hall was small and cold, the sort of place where a boy learned quickly that a stiff back was better than a sharp tongue. He trained under older knights, who laughed behind gloved hands at the muddy-faced boy who arrived in boots stitched by his mother-est hands. Bertrand endured, and when the time came, he stood his ground on tournament fields, against boys better fed, better armed, and better praised. But it was not his skill alone that carved his path. It was the loyalty that pulsed in his veins, like blood, the loyalty that made him defend his lord, banner even when the standard-bearer fell lifting the splintered pole from trampled grass and pressing it high above his head until his arm felt carved from stone. The chronicles say that once he rode all night to warn his lord of an ambush, slipping past enemy lines so quiet and small that no soldier thought to check the muddy boy moving among the supply carts. That same loyalty would echo through his later years, when he commanded men who trusted him not because he was born to lead, but because they knew he had once stood watch when every other heart had fled. Or think of John Chandos, whose name flickers through English records like a candle in a high window. Chandos began as squire to the Black Prince, Edward of Woodstock, a warrior, who carried the crest of England's ambitions into France and Spain. The Black Prince was fearsome, his banner feared across Europe, but it was Chandos who became the quiet steel at his side. They say that during the early campaigns, Chandos did more than bear the prince's arms and polish his helm. He was the eyes that saw danger before it struck. Once, at the Battle of Poitiers, when the English lines buckled under a wave of French knights, it was Chandos who urged the prince to hold steady, to trust the terrain, to wait for the moment when the charge would falter in the narrow lanes between head. When the moment came, Chandos fought not behind but beside the prince, his blade nicked and dulled by the clash. Though many sang the prince's name in the years that followed, Chandos remained there, the quiet counsel, the loyal guard, the man whose squire's service never truly ended even after he was knighted in turn. There are other tales too, lesser known, less polished by chroniclers who prefer the glitter of court intrigue to the plain truth of a boy's word kept true. Old rolls of parchment speak of squires who carried their wounded knights from fields so thick with arrows that the sun seemed to darken. Boys who gave up their horses so that the lord might escape an ambush, limping back to the fortress alone through Soden marshes and starlit woods. In the barracks, such stories become lessons told in the hush before sleep. One boy whispers how a squire once hid his knight's seal from enemies who searched the castle, swallowing the wax and parchment scrap, rather than see it fall into the wrong hands. Another remembers the tale of a squire who rode 4 days to deliver a plea for reinforcements. His feet so raw that when he finally stumbled into the king's hall he could barely stand long enough to speak the words. That turned a siege's tide. These stories are not all neat endings wrapped in gold ribbon. Loyalty often costs more than a boy can pay. Some squires gave up the chance to be knighted at all, remaining forever in service. When their master's line fell, or when the world changed so swiftly that the title meant little in the face of new banners and shifting borders. But even then, their quiet sacrifices linger like breath against stone, proof that in a world eager for grand gestures, it is sometimes the smallest, most steadfast acts that hold the line. The squire who lies on his straw pallet tonight knows this better than any scroll could teach. He carries the memory of every errand run through rain, every practice blade's sting, every hour spent waiting in the chill corridor outside his knight's chamber door. He knows that loyalty does not come when the feast is spread and the horns blow in triumph. It is shaped in the hush between those moments, in the patient mending of a torn banner before the dawn's ride, in the way his hand steadies the stirrup as his knight swings up for battle. In the darkness, he imagines his name added to this long, low song. Perhaps no bard will ever weave it into a tale for the hall's rafters to echo. Perhaps no chronicler will ink it carefully onto the brittle parchment that survives centuries of damp and flame. But the small warmth in his chest says it does not matter. The boys around him, the knight whose armor he oils, until his fingertips grow raw, the horse that whinnies when he approaches with a nosebag at dawn, these are the proofs of his service. So when the cold wind presses through the shutter cracks, when the straw prickles his bruised back, when sleep hovers just beyond reach, the squire holds tight to these stories. Not for glory, not for songs, but for the quiet promise that loyalty, once given, will shape him into something larger than the thin, half-grown boy who stands watch in the hush outside a heavy oak door. And someday, if he is called to ride through dark woods alone, or to stand steady when the banners fall and the yard lies empty, he will remember in that memory, he will find the iron that no practice blade can carve, the iron that hums like a lullaby through the stones that shelter his dreams. When the torches sputter low in the castle's draughty halls, when lords and knights retreat to warm chambers, heavy with whispered plots and hushed counsel, the squire remains, a quiet shadow near the door, eyes lowered, ears catching what they are meant to catch and more besides. History remembers the grand betrayals, the banners raised in revolt, the plots that spilled out into the courtyard like torchlight scattering darkness. But behind these sweeping events were boys too young to hold power, yet old enough to hold its secrets in the cup of their palms. To be a squire was to live in the hush between the clink of goblets and the crackle of the hearth. It was to stand behind a chair in the lord's hall as hushed voices slipped across a long table. Voices that, once carried through the wrong corridor, could topple more than a single banner. He stands there now, boots planted on cold stone, shoulders stiff despite the day's bruises. His knight speaks with another noble, a man whose velvet cloak drags over the rush mats, whose words drip honey but carry the sharp tang of iron. The boy's eyes never lift higher than the flagon he refills, yet every word sinks into him like water into dry cloth. Sometimes the secret is nothing more than a rumor, an insult traded behind closed doors, a grudge whispered over wine. Sometimes it is a plan, a midnight ride to a distant lord's hall, an alliance shaped with handshakes hidden in a corner, while the rest of the hall hums with song. Sometimes it is treachery, the shape of a plot so sharp it could cut the tongue of any boy foolish enough to repeat it. The squire learns, slowly, the weight of words unspoken. He learns to hold his breath when footsteps echo outside the door, to keep his face blank when eyes flick toward him, testing his loyalty with a single raised brow. He learns to turn away at the right moment, to bow just so undismissed, leaving no trace that the king's promise or the knight's bitter truth has lodged itself behind his ribs. And when the need arises, He does more than hold secrets. He carries them. Across fields blanketed in snow. Through woods so silent that each hoofbeat sounds like thunder under the moon. A scrap of parchment tucked under the lining of his tunic. A single word, learnt by heart, to be spoken only in a trusted ear. No armor shields him on these rides. No sword stands between him and the arrow or the knife that waits on dark roads. One such tale flickers through the dusty pages of old ledgers. The story of a squire who rode 4 days with a message that would have cost him his life 10 times over if caught. His name is lost now, a faded scribble at the edge of a lord's journal. But the message reached its mark, an alliance forged that turned the tide of a siege no knight alone could have lifted. And though his feet bled through his boots, though he slept upright in the saddle, he returned without boast or demand for reward, slipping back into the line of boys who polished shields and carried trays, as if nothing had changed. In some courts, squires were trusted more than any knight in gilded mail. Who else knew which door creaked at midnight, which page boy slipped coins into the stable hand's palm for news of visitors who arrived under hood and cloak? Who else saw the knight's quiet grief after a bitter loss? Or the lord's restless pacing in the small hours before dawn, when doubts pressed like winter fog against the castle walls? Yet this trust was a blade with 2 edges. A squire's word, once broken, might buy him a quick advantage. A coin slipped across a rough table in a tavern, a promise whispered in an enemy's ear. But every boy in the barracks knew that betrayal rotted the very straw they slept on. To speak what must remain silent was to risk disgrace, not only for himself but for the master, whose name clothed him like armor he could not remove. So they learned to keep their silence as carefully as they kept the steel bright and the saddles oiled. They learned that the true test of service was not always measured by a steady sword arm or a knee that did not buckle under the weight of a fallen knight, but by the small secrets they buried, so deep that even sleep could not loosen their hold. Some nights, lying on his pallet, the squire runs through these quiet truths like beads on a cord. The face he must never describe, the name he must never speak, the scrap of conversation he must carry to his grave if need be. He thinks of how the castle would tremble if even one whisper escaped his lips. He feels the weight of that loyalty settle around his shoulders like a rough wool cloak, scratchy, heavy, but warm in its way. The older boys remind him that this, too, shapes a knight. For what good is a sword that strikes true if the tongue behind it cuts deeper in careless talk? What use is a loyal horse or a well-oiled helm if the man inside it cannot guard what was trusted to him in confidence? They speak these truths softly, their voices blending with the wind rattling the shutters as they drift toward sleep. And when he stands, watch the next night, outside a door behind which secrets bloom like weeds in the hush, he keeps his hands clasped tight behind his back. He listens when he must. He turns away when he should. He feels the echo of 100 squires before him, boys who learned that the truest mark of trust is the secret never told. One day, perhaps, he will kneel in the yard with a blade laid lightly on each shoulder, the vow of knighthood pressed into the quiet hollow where secrets once curled like nesting birds. And when the new squires stand behind his chair, eyes wide and eager for stories, they will never know how many unspoken words he carries beneath his soul, stitched like hidden armor between each beat of his heart. Imagine now the end of a long day in the yard, the bruisers wrapped in rough linen, the practiced swords racked in neat rows along the fence. The dusk settles in like a sigh through the castle's open windows, the last clang of the forge fading into the hush that comes when the stables are mucked out. The horses fed, the barracks door pulled closed against the wind. In this hush, a squire sits cross-legged on his straw pallet. His hands still smell faintly of oil and horse sweat. His wrists bear the red wheels of the bowstring's bite. Yet tonight, under the flicker of a single rushlight guttering near the door, there is a softness in his chest, a warmth that rises not from grand feats or banners won, but from small, almost invisible moments. It might come as a simple nod from the master, a brief word at the end of drills. Good form today. Keep that guard high. No flourish, no praise that echoes off the yard's walls. But, for the boy who has spent weeks feeling the crack of the stick across his shoulders, that single word is a gift tucked under the bruises, a reminder that even small steps forward matter. Sometimes the reward is more practical. A battered coin slipped into a boy's palm by the steward when a message is carried swiftly through a storm, or a stable door is mended before the morning frost sets in. The coin might buy an extra crust from the cook's table or a length of sturdy twine for the boy who must repair the torn strap on his own belt. Small things, yet each a quiet sign that his hands are trusted, his steps steady enough to count for something. There are moments, too, when the knight himself turns, cloak still trailing dust from the road, and gives the squire a look that is not quite a smile, but not the blank stare of command either, a nod to follow him into the hall, a rough clap on the shoulder when the bridle is buckled just right, the saddle straps checked and checked again until they hold fast through miles of rough terrain. For some squires, the first sign that they are becoming more than shadows, behind chairs or feet shuffling through the yard, comes in the simple shape of being given a horse to ride, truly ride, on a hunt or errand beyond the castle-esque gates, no longer walking behind the hooves through bramble-choked lanes but seated upright, the reins resting light across a palm grown calloused from oiling leather every dawn. It is a trust that feels as heavy as any blade. The animal's breath, the swing of its gait, the knowledge that if he pulls too hard or lets his mind drift, he might lose both steed and status in a single careless moment. Sometimes, the small reward is nothing more than a place at the back of the hall, a seat at the low table with the older squires, bread dipped into the same broth that fills the bowls of the lesser knights, a single trencher of roasted meat, richer than the thin scraps they usually claim from the kitchens. In that quiet meal they taste not just fat and salt, but a hint of what might come. A place of their own, a seat closer to the hearth a day when their name is spoken, not as a boy who serves but as a man who leads. In the barracks, these scraps of recognition pass from hand to hand like stories shared under a heavy blanket. One boy jokes about the small coin he earned for finding a lost hound in the woods. It's muddy. Paw prints tracked through the stables until the master Toms barked with laughter instead of anger. Another boasts that his knight asked him to choose the best practice sword before a demonstration, trusting his eye for the straightest grain, the smoothest hilt. Not every small victory is shared aloud. Some live only in the warm pocket of a boy's memory, the way the Lord's lady once handed him a scrap of bread, still warm from the hearth, her eyes kind but quick so that the steward's sharp. The voice could not steal the comfort back, or the way the Master Harms pressed a battered helm into his hands at dusk, saying simply, "Keep it, you've earned the use of it." No parchment, no seal, just a small, dented shell of iron that felt like a crown when the boy set it beside his pallet that night. These gentle embers glow long after the torches burn low. They are what bind a squire to the dawn when the frost snaps at his toes, when the stable reeks and the yardie's mud clings to his boots like a reminder that tomorrow will bruise him anew. They remind him that he is more than sore shoulders and errands run in the rain, that each day brings a moment when the world shows him that he is seen, however briefly, however quietly. And for some, the greatest reward is not praise or coin or crust of meat, but the moment when his knight, standing in the hush of the armory, lets the guard drop. The older man's eyes soften, the heavy helm set aside, his voice quieter than the rasp of the grindstone. Perhaps he speaks a single truth. "You remind me of myself at your age," or he rests a rough hand on the squire's head as he passes, a blessing so subtle no chronicler would ever bother to write it down. These are the pieces the boy tucks away like treasured relics. The rough-spun comfort that all the small tasks, the raw blister, the nights awake at his post are shaping him for a life that will not always be lived in the hush of other men's shadows. When he curls into the straw that night, feet still chilled, shoulder still sore, he feels that tiny ember glowing, steady and sure. He knows that tomorrow the yard will demand more. The stick will tap out its sharp lesson, the horse will stamp impatiently in its stall, the steward will thrust another scrap of parchment into his palm before dawn has properly broken. But for now, in this moment, before sleep finds him, he lies wrapped in the quiet warmth of a boy who knows he is growing, inch by inch, swing by swing, bruise by bruise. And if no one sings a song for squires when the banners snap in the wind, if no poet weaves his name into the scrolls that survive fire and flood, it does not matter. He holds his small victories close, secret banners under his skin, the proof that even a life spent standing at another's shoulder can shine, if only for a heartbeat, like a star glimpsed through the cracks in an old, cold roof. Segment 6 Part 1, Looking Back. The threads that hold it all together. The training yard standing empty beneath a pale dawn sky. Churned earth hardened in the chill straw dummies, leaning slightly as if they too are dozing after a night of frost. No voices echo off the stone walls. No stick taps out the rhythm that drills lessons into muscle and bone. For a moment, all is still, as if the world holds its breath before the day begins again. In this hush, you can see the stories that have settled here like dust in the cracks of the old stones. Every scuff mark and dent in the wooden fence bears the memory of a practice blade striking true or wide. Each footprint, half-faded, tells of a boy's stumble, his knee pressed into the cold earth before he rose, shoulders square once more. If you listen closely, in that drifting way one listens when sleep stands nearby, comparing bruises by the flicker of the hush of whispered fears folded into straw pallets, the rough bark of a mustard arms whose voice was as much a blessing as a burden. Each squire who passed through this yard brought his own small thread to the great, unseen cloth that binds the walls of every keep and castle. It is not banners that hold these places together, nor the bright steel of a knight's sword. It is the patient, steady work of boys who run errands through the rain, stand watch through the longest night, hold their tongues when secrets press against the back of their teeth. You can almost see one now, a boy with sleep still clinging to his lashes, tugging his rough spun cloak tighter around his shoulders. His feet trace the same path to the stables each dawn, boots whispering over packed earth, the scent of hay and horse sweat wrapping him in its scratchy warmth. He stands there, brushing down the old porphyry with slow, steady strokes. His mind drifts as the brush flicks away dust, remembering the sharp crack of a practice sword, the dull ache in his shoulder, the soft nod from the master that told him wordlessly that he is learning. Past the stable door, the great hall hums with its own hush. The tables lie bare now, last night's crumbs swept away. The fire in the hearth banked low so only a thin line of smoke threads its way up the chimney. Here, too, a boy's work lingers, the knife polished before a meal, the cup filled before a hand can lift in request, the quiet step behind a lord's chair, light as a cat's. So the talk flows on, unaware that a pair of young ears carries its shape away into the shadows. In the barracks, the memory of sleep drifts in corners like the faint scent of straw and old sweat. You can almost picture the narrow bunks lined up beneath beams blackened by centuries of smoke. Each rough pallet holds the ghost of a boy curled onto his side, legs drawn up, a bruise blooming under the sleeve of a linen shirt mended so many times that the stitches crisscrossed like the branches of a winter tree. Their small victories, a nod, a coin, a crust of warm bread, flicker in the dark like fireflies that gather where the rush glow softens the rough edges of stone walls, each moment stitched tight to the next. The first time a knight trusted him to hold the reins during a thunderstorm, the first time he carried a message through snow and returned to find the master waiting, arms crossed, eyes softer than the iron edge of his barked commands. Some days, the hardship feels larger than the yard itself. The sharp bite of a stick across cold knuckles, the long hours standing guard while others feast, laughter rolling out from the great hall in waves that never quite reach the corridor's shadows, the empty belly that knots tight when the stew pot runs dry before the last trencher is dipped. These trials carve the boy's spine straighter, stitch patience into his bones, teach him that strength often grows in the quiet corners where no one thinks to look, and yet, woven through it all is something softer. A bond born not of glory, but of the simple truth that no boy stands alone. Even now as you drift further toward sleep you might hear the hush of a whisper in the dark, one squire offering half his crust to another, a palm pressed to a fevered forehead when the healer's basket sits empty, the clumsy murmur of a harvest song from a far-off village, hummed to soothe the rough scrape of homesickness that never quite fades. When these boys stand in line at dawn, practice swords lifted in aching hands, they do so not only for the chance to swing steel in battle one day. They stand for the small promise that each bruise is a thread connecting him to every squire who came before, each quiet sacrifice a knot that binds the castleless walls tighter than mortar ever could. So, as the yard stirs back to life, the stable doors creaking wide, the crows cawing in the chill morning air, you might feel the weight of these countless stories settle soft and steady over your shoulders. They are not tales of kings and crowns alone, but of the boys who polished those crowns until they caught the firelight just so. Boys who shouldered the shadows, carried secrets, endured the hush between footsteps in cold corridors. The squire's life is never truly his own, yet within its simple service lie the quiet riches that outlast banners torn in war, or names etched deep into marble. Here, in the hush that drifts around you now, you feel it. The small warmth of knowing that each small chore, each bruise and whispered story, leaves a mark no time can wash away. Imagine now the castle caught between night and day, That soft hour when the yard lies empty, except for the drifting breath of horses in the paddock, the faint creak of a shutter left unlocked, the sigh of the stones as they hold the warmth of fires burned low. It is in these quiet moments that the real lessons settle deepest, woven into the squire's bones like the smell of hay clinging to his cloak long after he leaves the stable behind. These lessons are not the ones barked from the mat, though those live under every welt and bruise, each echo of wood on wood in the yard. They are the ones he gathers for himself, bits and pieces shaped by chance, and the small kindnesses that slip between the cracks of harder days. He learns that patience is not just standing still, but standing still when every muscle screams to move. He feels it when he waits outside his knight's chamber door at midnight, eyes heavy, knees stiff from hours of drills, the hush inside broken only by the scratch of a quill or the soft crackle of a log in the hearth. The boy shifts his weight from foot to foot, counts heartbeats like steps on a long road, teaches himself to breathe in time with the flicker of the torch on the wall. In the yard, he learns that skill is never truly finished. A swing that feels perfect one dawn might falter the next, when the rain slicks the practiced blade or a shoulder stiffens from sleep taken wrong on straw. Each mistake presses a new truth into him. The road from Squire to night is not a single, straight path, but a winding one, worn down by each slip and stumble, each apology whispered into the dust as he rises sword lifted once more. He learns that silence is a gift, not the heavy, watchful hush of secrets, though he holds those too, but the quiet that comes when a stable door swings open at dawn and the horse, half asleep, leans into his touch with a soft snort. The way the world breathes when he kneels to tie a girth strap just so. Careful fingers smoothing leather that might one day carry his knight through a charge. In that hush, there is trust, the warm weight of an animal's flank, the steady heartbeat beneath thick winter hair. He learns about trust in other shapes, too, in the weight of a coin pressed into his palm after a long ride through sleet to deliver a message safely tucked in his sleeve, in the small nod from the steward when the errand returns completed before the sun lifts fully above the battlements. These are not parades or bright songs sung in his name, but they glow all the same faint embers against the dark worry that he is just another pair of boots shuffling through the mud. Sometimes, the lessons come at the barracks door where boys gather in their stolen hours before sleep. A younger squire sits with scraped knuckles and a look of defeat curling his shoulders forward. No stick strikes him here. No master's voice corrects the slip. Instead, an older boy shows him how to wrap a practice sword S-hilt with a scrap of cloth to keep the wood from biting so deep. He taps the boy's shoulder with his own, a wordless promise that no one learns alone. And in this way, they teach each other patience, and the small ways to endure hunger and cold, and the jokes that make the worst bruises sting less. They share stale crusts of bread tucked away in sleeves, old songs half remembered from a mother's kitchen. They remind each other that the hardship is not the whole story, that buried under the mud and the scoldings lies the quiet, stubborn shape of hope. For some, that hope is the promise of the spurs, the bright symbol of a future, when they will stand as men with banners of their own, blades no longer borrowed but forged for hands that have proven steady enough to bear them. For others, the dream is simpler. A day when the stick no longer taps at the back of their knees, when the steward calls their name with trust rather than suspicion, when the horse turns its head at their whistle, and no one else's. And if some never reach that future, if the world shifts too soon or the Lord's coin runs dry, the lessons remain. They carry them home to small farms or forge fires that burn low through winter. They pass them to sons who, in turn, will stand in their own yards, practiced swords lifted in shaking hands, eyes fixed on the same sun that breaks across cold ramparts every dawn. So tonight, as you lie here, in the hush where these stories drift, you might feel the shape of those lessons winding through your own heart. They are small things: patience, trust, silence, the simple comfort of a nod when the day's weight feels heavier than your shoulders can bear. You do not need the crack of a stick or the clatter of boots in the yard to know they hold true. You can carry them now folded soft as old parchment into the corners of your mind, a reminder that even the smallest life bent over chores at dawn, carrying scraps of parchment through snow standing guard in the cold hush of a corridor. Even that life is shaped by strength you might never see written in grand books. In the hush you might hear it. The yard stirs to life again, voices low, boots striking the same beaten path that has carried countless boys from straw pallet to open field. Each step presses a small lesson into the earth. Each swing of a practice blade leaves behind a promise that no effort, no bruise, no secret carried in the folds of a tunic is ever truly wasted. So, let these quiet truths settle deeper now, like the warmth that pools in your chest when you drift between waking and sleep. The simple knowledge that the smallest lessons stay stitching themselves around your ribs like a cloak you didn't know you'd been given. Imagine now the castle standing silent under a blanket of early mist. The towers half lost in the hush of dawn. The courtyard's churned earth smoothed overnight by the drift of light rain. The practice swords lean neatly in their racks. The straw dummies slouch like old men waiting for the next lesson to jar them awake. Even the stable doors hang half open, a horse shifting inside, hooves tapping a soft, sleepy rhythm against the straw. Somewhere within these stones, a squire stirs, stretching legs stiff from the barracks straw, boots scraping over the rush mats. He is no different from the hundreds who came before him, nor from those who will come after. His tunic is patched at the elbows, the hem frayed where it brushes the tops of his worn boots. His palms are raw from the oil that clings to leather straps and practice blades. His shoulders bear the ghosts of old bruises. Yet if you could follow him, past the low fire in the kitchen, through the quiet corridor that winds toward the yard, you would see how every step he takes is laid over the faded footprints of boys whose names are long lost to the hush of time. Each echo in these stones is a small voice reminding him, you are not alone. You have never been alone. It is easy, when you drift through these stories, to imagine the squire as a single boy, one shadow slipping through the castle's heart. But he is in truth all of them. The muddy child who arrived clinging to the tailboard of a cart, eyes wide with wonder and dread. The wiry lad with his first practice sword, splinters biting his knuckles. The older boy whose shoulders square a little more each day, who lifts his head when the muskrat arms passes and does not flinch. Their lives weave together like old cloth patched and repatched, until it is stronger than any single bolt could be. One boy is stifled tears on a straw pallet, comfort the next, who wakes in the dark and thinks he alone feels the ache of homesickness knotting tight in his chest. One boy's whispered joke in the hush before sleep makes the bruise on another's forearm hurt a little less. A crust of bread tucked into a pocket, a blanket edge shared when the wind rattles the shutters. These are threads that bind them tighter than any oath. They are bound to by the small things they endure. The sting of the stick when the guard drops too low. The cold breath of dawn when a horse bucks against the bridle. The sharp fear when a secret clings too close to their ribs and must never slip free, no matter how tired they grow under its weight. And yet, each trial is matched by something softer, a master's nod, a knight's hand resting briefly on a bowed head. The simple warmth that lingers in the hush after the day's last chore is done. If you look closely, you'll see how even the castle itself seems to know these stories. The stones hold them like secrets whispered into cracks that run deeper than any mason's chisel could find. The rush mats bear the hush of footsteps that never quite fade. The battered gates creak on hinges oiled 100,000 times by hands no one remembers, but whose careful work keeps the rust from biting deep. In this way, the squire becomes part of something larger than himself, a thread in a vast, patient tapestry. His small victories a strap. Buckled tight, the sword swung true, the horse led calmly through a thunderstorm. Are knots and stitches that hold the pattern steady when the winds of change blow through the keeper's open windows. Not every boy will stand in the yard one day, sword lifted high, spurs bright against the leather of his boots. Some will carry their lessons elsewhere, to the forged fires that shape plowshares and hinges, to the fields that remember the taste of a father's sweat. Others will ride behind their lords to places far beyond these stone walls, their faces half hidden under helms they once polished for other men. Yet the threads they leave behind never unravel. A small kindness whispered in the barracks, a single secret carried safely across a night when betrayal waited on every road. A battered practice sword swung until it sang through the air with the weight of muscles shaped by repetition alone. These linger, not in bright heraldry stitched into a noble's banner, but in the hush that settles when the last torch sputters out, and the yard stands quiet under the soft touch of moonlight. So, as you drift now, think of this cloth, rough and warm, patched through the centuries, stronger because of every small life woven into it. The squire's world is not made of grand moments alone, but of countless small ones, bruises borne without complaint, secrets kept without reward, loyalty pressed deep into the cracks of old stones. This is what holds the walls together long after kings have come and gone. the knowledge that for every banner lifted high, there was once a boy who stood behind it in the dark, feet planted on cold stone, hands steady even when his heart trembled like a rushlight in a draught. And though you lie far from that yard now, warm under your own roof, the echo of those footsteps hums through the hush around you like a lullaby. It reminds you, gently, steadily, that the smallest things you do, the patience you carry, the quiet loyalty that no one sees but you, stitch themselves into something larger than any one dawn could ever hold. Let that thought settle over your shoulders now, soft as an old cloak worn thin by faithful hands. Breathe with it, let it lower you toward the drift and sway that carries you from these worn stones into the hush of your own sleep. A place shaped like the Squire's world by small threads that hold strong even in the dark. Picture the castle now as it settles deeper into night, its walls breathing warmth back into the chill that creeps in through arrow slits and unlatched shutters. The torches in the courtyard gutters out one by one, the last ember flickering like the heartbeat of the yard itself. The straw dummies lean in their corners, the battered practice swords rest in neat rows, their worn grips smelling faintly of oil, sweat, and the small stories they helped carve into the boys who held them. Somewhere beyond the dark stable doors, a horse shifts on its hooves, exhaling a long, contented breath that clouds the air before it disappears. A wind drifts along the battlements, tugging at the old banners that hang limp until dawn comes to lift them again. It rattles the loose shutter of the barracks where the squires lie, curled in the hush boys in straw beds, blankets tucked around bruises that will be forgotten by morning, their dreams, laced with echoes of the stick tapping against cold earth. This is the hour when the squire's world is There are no barked orders, no master's sharp voice to snap him awake. The yard is his alone now, a place he can wander in his mind without the fear of missing a step or dropping his guard. Here, in this drifting space, he can feel how the bruises he earned in daylight become gentle lessons folded into the hush that rocks him towards sleep. He remembers half dreaming how it felt to stand in the shadow of a knight's broad shoulders, a hand resting heavy on his own narrow back. The first time the muster-at-arms looked at him and did not find fault. The first time a horse nuzzled his shoulder, trusting the boy's hands more than the stable hand's whip. Small things, but when darkness folds around him, they grow warmer than any feast or praise sung aloud. If you stand with him now at the edge of sleep, you might feel the same hush settle into your own bones. You might feel how each trial, each knock of the stick, each night when the bread was stale, and the belly hollow, left behind not just ache, but strength. The kind that glows quiet under the skin. A strength shaped not by shining armor, but by the steady rise each time he fell. In this hour, there is no need for grand banners or silver spurs. There is no need for the clash of blades or the sharp scent of horses sweating under their padded saddles. There is only this soft, unseen promise that the smallest life, lived with steady service, is never truly forgotten. The stories breathe here, not shouted from the rafters of the great hall, but carried like a secret in the hush that drifts through the old stones. It does not matter if the world never learns the Squire's name, never inks it onto a roll of noble deeds, or weaves it into the bright threads of a lord's heraldry. The battered practice sword knows. They hold his small efforts like a hand cradles a coal until the spark catches again, and again, and again, in every boy who lifts his head in the yard's first pale light. And so, as you let these stories drift further from your waking thoughts, you might feel the weight of your own burdens settle lighter across your chest. You might find yourself remembering that the small things, the patience you hold when no one notices, the kindness you offer when you could turn away, the secret promise you keep though it asks more than you have to give, are threads stitched into something older than any stone tower. The wind hums at the shutter now, low and even, like the master's stick tapping out a slow, final rhythm. The straw crackles beneath the boy's breath as he turns onto his side, pulling his blanket up to his chin. In his dreams, the yard waits for him, empty and forgiving. The bruises fade in this place. The old dummies stand straight, the swords rest true in his palms, each swing as smooth as the promise that tomorrow he will rise again, shoulders squared, heart steady. And if you drift far enough into that hush, far enough that even the sound of your own thoughts softens, you might feel your own bruises loosening their grip. You might sense the weight of all the small secrets you keep pressing back into the straw, where they become the good kind of heavy, the kind that keeps you warm when the wind tugs at the shutters and the night leans long against the window. So let the stories slip their edges now. Let the yard grow soft in your mind. its earth smoothed over by sleep. Let the stick fall silent, the horses breathe easy, the barracks hold their hush. There is nothing more to do tonight. The lessons wait patiently for morning. The cloak of service rests, for now, across your shoulders. Warm, rough, but familiar in a way that asks nothing more than your breath, your quiet heart, your small, steady promise to try again when the dawn comes. And when it does, you will rise with the others, your boots brushing the yard's old stones, your hands lifting the same practice blade that has taught so many before you. But here, in this drifting hush, you are only a boy lying under the slow, forgiving dark, wrapped in every whispered secret, every old bruise, every soft truth that says, your smallest effort matters. It always has. It always will. Sleep now. The castle stands, watch. The stories stand, watch. And all those who once swung a practice sword in the hush of dawn stand watch. 2. Quiet company to guard your rest until the morning calls you gently back.